Hello guys. Welcome to Pika Fiction. So in this video, we will see what if Ash became a true Pokémon master who could speak to all Pokémon. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The voice of the world. The air on Mount Silver was thin enough to burn the lungs, sharp and clean as a shard of ice. It was a place that tolerated life but did not welcome it, a final bastion of raw, untamed wilderness standing sentinel over the sleeping regions of Kanto and Johto. For Ash Ketchum, now 21 and the reigning champion of Alola, it was the perfect grinding stone. He stood on a windswept plateau, a granite stage scarred by 1,000 forgotten battles, his worn crimson cap pulled low against the biting wind. Opposite him, two blurs of motion resolved into his Pokémon, their bodies weaving a deadly dance of speed and precision. Greninja was a whisper of dark blue, a shadow that moved between the falling snowflakes. Water Shuriken, shimmering like discs of spun moonlight, flew from its hands without a thought. They weren't aimed to strike but to control, to herd, to dictate the flow of the fight. Its opponent, Sceptile, was a vibrant green streak of contained fury. Its movements were whipcord fast, economical, each step a calculated burst of energy. A leaf blade, glowing with the fierce light of a miniature sun, sliced through the air, shattering the incoming shuriken into a mist that froze instantly in the frigid air. Closer, Sceptile. Don't let it dictate the range. Ash's voice was calm, cutting through the howl of the wind without effort. He didn't need to shout. After a decade of constant battle, the bond with his team was less a matter of commands and more a matter of shared intent. Pikachu sat perched on his shoulder, its small body radiating a steady warmth against his neck. Its ears twitched, black-tipped triangles tracking every feint and parry. It wasn't just watching, it was analyzing, its mind as sharp as any strategist's. On a rock outcropping above them, Charizard sat with its arms crossed, a plume of smoke curling from its nostrils with every breath. Its sheer presence was a promise of overwhelming power held in reserve, its gaze fixed on the sparring match with the critical eye of a veteran warrior. Sceptile processed Ash's thought and translated it into action. It dug its claws into the icy ground and launched forward, becoming a living projectile. The world seemed to slow as it closed the distance, the forest green of its body a stark contrast to the monochrome landscape of rock and snow. Greninja reacted instantly, its own form melting into the shadows cast by the jagged rocks. It was a battle of philosophies. Sceptile's overwhelming frontal assault versus Greninja's elusive, death by 1,000 cuts guerrilla warfare. This was their routine. Pushing limits, refining techniques, seeking a perfection that always seemed to be just one battle beyond their reach. Being a champion wasn't an end goal, it was a baseline, a starting point from which the real work began. He'd learned that the hard way. The fanfare of the Alolan League had faded, leaving behind a quiet restlessness, a hunger for a challenge that the formal structure of the Pokémon League could no longer satisfy. So he had come here, to the place where legends were born and broken, to train in the crucible of the wild. A sudden, unnatural drop in temperature made the hairs on his arms stand up. The wind, which had been a steady, mournful cry, shifted its pitch, rising to a vicious, shrieking crescendo. It was no longer the indifferent voice of the mountain. It sounded angry. Charizard lifted its head, a low growl rumbling in its chest. It sniffed the air, its expression turning from bored vigilance to genuine alarm. Ash, Pikachu's voice was a familiar spark in his mind, not of words, but of pure, undiluted concern. A feeling. A warning. It was the way they had always communicated, a language of empathy built over a lifetime of shared experience. He felt Pikachu's anxiety as if it were his own. He gave a sharp whistle, and the sparring instantly ceased. Greninja and Sceptile appeared at his sides, their bodies tensed, scanning the horizon. The sky, a clear, deep violet moments ago, was now churning with clouds the color of a fresh bruise. They swirled in a vortex centered directly above the peak, a furious, impossible storm materializing from nothing. Snow began to fall, not in gentle flakes, but in a thick, blinding curtain that reduced visibility to a few feet. To the cave, now, Ash ordered, pulling his jacket tighter. This wasn't a natural weather pattern. It was violent, predatory. He had faced the wrath of Zapdos, seen the power of Kyogre, and this felt similar. It felt like something was raging. Before they could move, a deep, earth-shaking tremor ran through the plateau. It wasn't an earthquake. It was the thunder of footsteps. Hundreds of them. Through the swirling blizzard, massive shapes began to appear at the edge of the plateau, their dark green bodies like mobile pieces of the mountain itself. Tyranitar. A whole clan of them, their armored hides deflecting the worst of the wind, their eyes glowing with primal terror. They weren't charging to attack. They were fleeing, stampeding. And their path was leading them directly toward the eastern cliff face, a sheer drop of several thousand feet into a gorge of jagged rock and ice. They're going to go right over the edge, Ash yelled over the storm. His mind raced. He couldn't fight them all. He couldn't block them. He had to stop them. Charizard, Flame Wall. Don't hit them, just turn them. Charizard was airborne in a heartbeat, a beacon of orange against the gray fury. It unleashed a torrent of fire, not a flamethrower, but a wide, sweeping arc of intense heat that painted a shimmering barrier in the snow. The lead Tyranitar recoiled, skidding to a halt just feet from the flames, but the sheer momentum of the herd behind it was too great. They pushed forward, a terrified, unstoppable tide of muscle and armor. The wall of fire wasn't enough. It was then that the noise hit him. Not the roar of the storm or the thunder of the stampede, but a sound from within his own mind. It had always been there, a low hum of Pokémon emotions, a background frequency he had learned to live with. Now, the volume knob was cranked to infinity. The Tyranitar's terror wasn't just a feeling he observed, it was a psychic scream that tore through his skull. Pain storm sky screams falling crushing fear fear fear. The raw, unfiltered instinct of 100 panicked, powerful creatures flooded his consciousness. It was a cacophony of primal dread, of splintered thoughts and images. The feeling of the wind like claws, the sound of the sky tearing open, the ancestral memory of mountain collapses and crushing rock. He staggered, clutching his head, a cry of agony escaping his lips. Pikachu squeaked in alarm, its paws pressing against his cheek. Through the pain, another layer of sound emerged. It was a single, pure note of immense suffering, the source of the storm's rage and the Tyranitar's panic. It was a voice, ancient and vast, crying out in a language he shouldn't have understood, but suddenly did. It burns. The sky, the song, it is wrong, make it stop. The voice was a lance of psychic energy that pierced the chaos. It was the mind of a legendary Pokémon. He could feel its confusion, its pain driving the storm, its agony bleeding out into the atmosphere and poisoning the mountain itself. Ash gritted his teeth, his own pain and the legendary's agony and the Tyranitar's terror all blurring into one unbearable symphony of suffering. He couldn't separate them. He couldn't think. He could only feel. He felt the cold terror of the smallest Tyranitar being pushed toward the cliff by its larger kin. He felt its desperate, silent plea for salvation. Something inside him snapped. A dam he never knew existed broke, and a power he had only ever touched with his fingertips now flooded every cell of his being. He straightened up, his eyes blazing with a light that had nothing to do with the storm. The cacophony in his head didn't vanish, but it suddenly resolved. The noise became a chorus. The chaos became a language. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the freezing air, and he roared back at the stampede. It wasn't a command in any human tongue. It was a raw projection of his will. A sound forged from the very essence of the mountain, imbued with the authority of someone who understood their fear and refused to let it consume them. Stop. The word was a physical force. It ripped through the blizzard, a shockwave of pure intent. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a challenge. It was a statement of absolute fact. The lead Tyranitar, its feet just yards from the cliff edge, froze mid-stride, its massive body locking up as if it had turned to stone. The one behind it crashed into it, and the one behind that, a chain reaction of screeching armor and sliding claws. The entire herd, a force of nature that a moment ago seemed unstoppable, ground to a halt. They stood there, trembling, their panicked eyes fixed on the lone human figure who had spoken in a voice older than their own bloodline. They were still terrified of the storm, but a new, more immediate authority had overridden that fear. Ash swayed, the effort draining him. Blood trickled from his nose. His team stared at him, their expressions a mixture of awe and concern. He had always been their leader, but this was something new. Something primal. He ignored their silent questions, his focus narrowing on the source of the pain, the agonized voice at the heart of the storm. Charizard. Get me up there. Sceptile, Greninja. Keep the herd calm. Don't let a single one get near that cliff. He didn't wait for a response. He leapt onto Charizard's back as the fire lizard swooped down, his hands gripping the familiar, warm scales. They ascended into the swirling vortex of black clouds and ice, the world below vanishing in an instant. The wind was a physical beast, tearing at them with invisible claws. Hailstones the size of fists hammered against Charizard's wings, each impact a dull thud that Ash felt through the saddle. But Charizard was relentless, its powerful wings beating against the tempest, its own fury a match for the storms. They climbed higher and higher, breaking through the densest layer of clouds into a scene of breathtaking, terrible beauty. They were in the eye of the storm. The wind was an impossible, circular wall of black cloud and lightning around them, but the space within was eerily calm. And in the center of that calm, floating with a grace that defied its immense size, was Lugia. Its silver-white scales, normally so brilliant, were dull and marred with streaks of what looked like psychic burns. Its great, wing-like hands were clamped to the sides of its head, and its body convulsed with every blinding flash of lightning that arced across the storm wall. The voice Ash had heard in his mind was now a constant, keening cry of pure torment. The song, the needle in my soul, it shreds the silence, it breaks the harmony. Ash's new sense showed him the truth. A high-frequency energy, invisible to the naked eye, was lancing through the air, focused directly on Lugia. It was a weapon. Not one designed to kill, but to inflict unimaginable agony, to turn a guardian of the seas into a mindless engine of destruction. Lugia, Ash called out, his voice now a conduit for the strange power flowing through him. He didn't just shout words, he pushed a feeling of calm, of empathy, of a shared desire to end the pain. I can hear you. Let me help. Lugia's head snapped toward them, its eyes glowing a dangerous, feverish red. It saw them not as rescuers, but as another source of pain in its tortured world. A beam of blue energy, an aeroblast of compressed, destructive air, shot from its mouth. Dive! Ash yelled. Charizard folded its wings and plummeted, the beam searing the air where they had been a second before. They looped under the great beast, coming up on its other side. He couldn't fight it. To battle Lugia would be to kick a creature that was already down. He had to reach its mind, to untangle the knot of pain that was strangling it. He had to speak to it, not as a trainer to a Pokémon, but as one thinking, feeling being to another. Charizard, get me closer. I have to touch it. Charizard roared its dissent, a sound that clearly translated to, are you insane? Trust me. Ash projected the thought with all the conviction he possessed. Charizard growled its reluctance but obeyed, its powerful wings driving them forward, straight toward the thrashing legendary. Ash braced himself, extending a hand. He poured all his focus, all his will, into that single point of contact. He tuned out the storm, the pain, everything but the agonized mind of the creature before him. He felt Lugia's mental shields, barriers of instinct and agony erected to keep everything out. They were like walls of solid static. He didn't try to break them. Instead, he gently pushed, sending a simple, clear thought, a memory. He sent it the feeling of floating in the calm, quiet depths of the ocean. The feeling of the sun on its back. The sound of the sea, the true song it was meant to guard. Peace, quiet, harmony, he thought, shaping the concepts into a soothing balm. For a moment, Lugia's struggles lessened. Its red eyes flickered, a hint of its true, intelligent self piercing through the madness. It was enough. Charizard surged forward, and Ash's palm slapped against Lugia's immense, silver side. The world exploded. He wasn't on a mountain anymore. He was adrift in an ocean of pain, a universe of screaming sound. He was Lugia. He felt the needle of the alien frequency boring into its ancient mind, shredding its thoughts, turning its connection to the world into a feedback loop of agony. He felt its duty, its eon's long watch over the currents of the sea and sky, now twisted into a weapon against it. But beneath it all, he felt its spirit, vast, deep, and unbelievably strong. Guardian of the sea, Ash's thought was a clear bell in the storm of Lugia's mind. You are not alone. Let me bear the pain with you. He didn't try to block the frequency. He did something far more dangerous. He opened his own mind to it, drawing a fraction of the agony into himself. The pain was blinding, a white-hot spike driving through his temples, but it bought Lugia a precious moment of clarity. In that moment, he showed it what he saw. He projected the image of the energy source, not a thing of nature, but a point of manufactured, malicious intent. A tiny, almost invisible point hovering in the air a few hundred yards away. A drone. A sleek, black, technologically advanced machine, no bigger than a monkey, its surface shimmering with a stealth field that had kept it hidden. It was the source of the needle in its soul. Lugia's immense will, now focused and freed from the worst of the pain, joined with Ash's. Together, they looked at the drone. A new, shared thought echoed between them. Break it. Ash pulled back from the mind meld, gasping, the world swimming back into focus. Pikachu, now. Full power. Aim for that spot, he screamed, pointing a trembling finger into the seemingly empty air. Pikachu didn't hesitate. It had felt the psychic backlash through Ash. It knew. Its cheeks crackled, gathering an impossible amount of electricity. The air thickened with the smell of ozone. With a cry of, Pikachu! It unleashed a thunderbolt of staggering proportions. It wasn't a wild blast. It was a concentrated spear of pure, golden energy, more powerful than any it had ever summoned in a stadium. The bolt tore through the eye of the storm and struck the pinpoint Ash had indicated. For a second, there was nothing. Then, the air rippled. The drone's stealth field failed, revealing its angular, metallic form for a fraction of a second before the lightning consumed it. The machine was vaporized in a flash of white light, its agonizing signal cutting out with an abrupt, final silence. The effect was instantaneous. The keening cry in Lugia's mind vanished. The storm wall, no longer powered by its agony, began to dissipate. The winds calmed, the churning clouds thinned, and shafts of weak sunlight broke through the gloom. Lugia sagged in the air, its body trembling with exhaustion, the feverish red in its eyes fading back to their normal, deep sapphire. It turned its massive head toward Ash. It didn't speak in words this time. It sent a feeling. A wave of profound, ancient gratitude so overwhelming it was almost a physical blow. It was a thank you that resonated in the very marrow of his bones. Then, with a final, majestic cry that was no longer pained but full of its old power, it dipped a wing in salute and dove, vanishing into the now clearing sky toward the distant sea. The moment the immediate danger was over, the adrenaline that had been holding Ash together evaporated. The psychic backlash from the shared pain, the immense strain of projecting his will, the sheer sensory overload of hearing the world's soul. It all came crashing down on him. His strength fled his limbs. The world tilted, the colors bleeding together at the edges. Ash! He heard Charizard's mental roar of alarm as he slumped forward, his consciousness dissolving into a welcome, silent darkness. He collapsed against the warm, scaly back of his oldest friend, the echo of 100 billion voices finally fading to a quiet hum. Miles away, in a room devoid of light save for the cold, blue glow of holographic monitors, a man watched a screen fizzle into static. The display showed a single line of text. Asset 7. Signal lost. Cause: catastrophic energy surge. The man, Director Valerius, stood with his hands clasped behind his back. He was tall and impeccably dressed, his face a mask of calm, analytical detachment. The room was silent, the air chilled to a precise temperature. On the screens around him were dozens of other data points. Meteorological charts showing the impossible storm cell over Mount Silver vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Biometric readings from the Tyranitar herd showing their collective heart rate dropping from critical to normal in the space of a single second, and satellite imagery that was now useless due to localized atmospheric ionization. An aide, a young woman with a severe haircut and a data slate clutched in her hands, stepped into the room. Sir, confirmation. The Lugia has returned to the Whirl Islands. The anomaly on Mount Silver has ceased. All readings are back within expected parameters. Valerius didn't turn. His eyes remained fixed on the static-filled screen. Expected parameters have been redefined today, Lieutenant, he said, his voice a low, even baritone. The initial probe was a success. It confirmed the subject's latent potential is far greater than our models predicted. He didn't just pacify the legendary, he communicated with it. He located and neutralized a state-of-the-art stealth drone while in the epicenter of a Category 5 localized hurricane. So, the anomaly is active, the lieutenant stated, a flicker of something, unease, perhaps, in her professional tone. Valerius finally turned, a thin, mirthless smile touching his lips. It didn't reach his cold, gray eyes. Active is an understatement. He has become a nexus. A single human being who can potentially influence, if not outright command, the most powerful living forces on this planet. He is no longer just a champion, Lieutenant. He is a walking weapon of mass destruction who doesn't even realize he's holding the trigger. He looked at the tactical map of the world shimmering in the center of the room, a glowing red dot marking Mount Silver. This changes nothing. It simply accelerates the timetable. The subject must be contained. Phase 1 is complete. Commence Phase 2. Sir, the lieutenant's voice was firm. Which assets are we deploying for Phase 2? Director Valerius's gaze was chilling. All of them. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Sinnoh-sympathy Ash awoke to the gentle, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor and the sterile, antiseptic smell of a Pokémon center. For a moment, he was adrift, the memories of the storm and the voice of a god feeling like a fever dream. Then, it all came rushing back, the consuming terror of the Tyranitar, the agony of Lugia, the impossible power that had roared through him. He sat up with a gasp, his body aching as if he'd gone 10 rounds with a Machamp. Pikachu was asleep on the pillow next to him, its small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. His other Pokémon were out of their Pokéballs, standing a silent, protective watch around his bed. Charizard was by the window, its massive form silhouetted against the morning sun rising over the foothills of Mount Silver. Sceptile and Greninja stood near the door, a silent, formidable pair of sentinels. Their concern was a palpable presence in the room, a warm, comforting blanket of shared feeling. He could feel it more clearly than ever before. He closed his eyes, concentrating. The bond had always been there, an empathic link forged in the heat of 1,000 battles. But this was different. It was clearer, sharper. He could feel Charizard's simmering pride, a deep satisfaction in having weathered the storm and protected him. He could sense Greninja's quiet vigilance, its mind a calm, deep pool of focused awareness. And from Pikachu, even in sleep, he felt a current of unwavering, unconditional loyalty that was the bedrock of his entire life. It wasn't just his own team. He extended his senses beyond the room and felt more. The weary resignation of a Nurse Joy's Blissey down the hall, the nervous energy of a young trainer's Rattata in the waiting room, the deep, rumbling contentment of a Snorlax sleeping somewhere in the town below. It was a chorus of minds, a tapestry of consciousness, faint but undeniable. The voice of the world was still with him, no longer a deafening scream, but a constant, ambient whisper at the edge of his hearing. A wave of vertigo washed over him. This wasn't just an evolution of his aura abilities. It was a fundamental shift in how he perceived reality. He could hear the thoughts and feelings of every Pokémon around him. The implications were staggering, terrifying, and lonely. Who could possibly understand this? The door slid open and Nurse Joy entered, a warm smile on her face. "Oh, you're awake. Champion Ketchum. You gave us all quite a scare. The Rangers found you and your Pokémon near the summit. They said you saved the entire mountain." Ash swung his legs over the side of the bed. "I had help," he said, scratching a drowsy Pikachu behind the ears. "How long was I out?" "Just under 24 hours, she replied, checking his chart. "Physically, you're fine. A little exhausted, but no lasting damage. Mentally, well, your brainwave activity was unlike anything we've ever recorded. Off the charts." She looked at him with a mixture of professional curiosity and genuine awe. The news reports were already calling it the miracle at Mount Silver. Sensationalized headlines spoke of a mysterious storm, a legendary Pokémon, and a lone trainer who had stood against the tempest and won. They got the broad strokes right, but the reality of it, the intimate, terrifying connection he had forged, was something they could never grasp. He knew he couldn't stay here. He couldn't go home to Pallet Town, not yet. His mom would worry, and Professor Oak, brilliant as he was, would see this as a biological phenomenon to be studied. But this felt older, deeper. This wasn't science. It was something else. It was myth. And when it came to the myths and legends that formed the very bedrock of their world, one name came to mind. Cynthia. She wasn't just the champion of Sinnoh, a title that felt woefully inadequate to describe her. She was a scholar, a historian, an archaeologist of the arcane. She spent as much time in dusty libraries and ancient ruins as she did in battle stadiums. If anyone in the world could shed some light on what was happening to him, it was her. He thanked Nurse Joy, recalled his team, and left the Pokémon Center, pulling his cap low to avoid the stares of the few people who recognized him. He booked the first flight to Sinnoh, the hum of the airplane's engines a welcome distraction from the quiet chorus of Pokémon minds in the cargo hold. Celestic Town was nestled in a basin in the heart of Mount Coronet, a place where time seemed to move at a different pace. The air was thick with history, and ancient, moss-covered stones dotted the landscape between traditional wooden houses. A fine mist clung to the ground, muffling sound and lending the town a dreamlike quality. At its center was the Celestic Town Historical Research Center, a modern building constructed respectfully around the town's ancient shrine. It was there he had arranged to meet her. She was standing by the shrine when he arrived, a striking figure in her customary black coat, her long, pale blonde hair shifting in the gentle breeze. She turned as he approached, and a genuine smile graced her features. She was just as he remembered, an aura of quiet confidence, and intelligent, gray eyes that seemed to see right through you. "Ash," she said, her voice warm and melodic. "It's good to see you. The news from Johto was dramatic. I had a feeling I'd be hearing from you." "Cynthia," he replied, a sense of relief washing over him. "Thanks for meeting me. I didn't know who else to talk to." When the champion of Alola, who is famous for attracting legendary Pokémon like a Mismagius to a dusk stone, is at the center of an event involving an unnatural storm and a rampaging Lugia, it tends to attract my attention, she said, a hint of amusement in her tone. "Let's go inside. You look like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders." They settled in her private study at the back of the research center. It was a beautiful, chaotic room, filled with stacks of leather-bound books, ancient scrolls, and carefully labeled artifacts. Sunlight streamed through a large bay window that overlooked a tranquil garden. Cynthia poured them both a cup of tea, her movements graceful and precise. "So," she began, her gaze direct and analytical, "tell me what really happened on Mount Silver, and please, don't leave out the parts the news would call unbelievable." Ash took a deep breath and told her everything. He told her about the sudden storm, the stampeding Tyranitar, and the overwhelming flood of their terror in his mind. He described the voice of Lugia, not as a sound, but as a feeling, as words made of pure agony. He explained how he had spoken back, how he had touched Lugia's mind and shared its pain to locate the source of its torment. As he spoke, he watched her, gauging her reaction. She listened intently, her expression unreadable, her fingers steepled before her lips. When he finished, the room was silent save for the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Ash felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. He had laid bare the most insane experience of his life. He half expected her to call for a psychologist. Cynthia was quiet for a long moment, her sharp gaze seeming to pierce right through him. "You're not describing aura, Ash," she said finally, her voice measured. "Aura guardians can sense emotions, project their will. What you're describing, it's translation. True, two-way communication. You didn't just feel what they felt. You understood their words. You spoke in a way their primal instincts couldn't ignore." She stood up and walked to the window, her back to him. "There are ancient Sinnoh legends, stories that predate written history. They speak of a master, a human who was not a king or a conqueror, but a bridge. A being who could speak the language of the world's soul, the collective consciousness of all Pokémon. He was said to have been the one who forged the original pact of cooperation between our two species. Most scholars dismiss it as a creation myth, a metaphor." She turned back to him, her eyes serious. "I'm beginning to think it wasn't a metaphor." A massive shape stirred from the corner of the room, where it had been resting in the shadows. Cynthia's Garchomp rose to its full, intimidating height. It stretched its powerful limbs and then padded silently over to her side, its yellow eyes fixing on Ash. It was a magnificent creature, radiating an aura of power that would have sent a lesser trainer running. Ash met its gaze without flinching. And he heard it. It wasn't a word. It was a complex, layered wave of emotion and intent, as clear as Cynthia's spoken voice. He felt a fierce, almost overwhelming protectiveness directed at Cynthia. Beneath that, a deep-seated anxiety, a constant, nagging fear. Not a fear of battle or pain, but a fear of failure. A dread of the day it wouldn't be strong enough, fast enough, of a day it would let her down. He saw flashes of memory from its perspective. The devastating loss to a challenger's Weavile. The sting of a dragon rush that had come a fraction of a second too late. He felt its shame, its desperate drive to be the perfect, unbeatable guardian for the woman it loved more than life itself. The depth and clarity of it stole his breath. "It's worried about you," Ash said, his voice barely a whisper. Garchomp's head cocked, its gaze intensifying. Cynthia looked from him to her Pokémon, a frown creasing her brow. "Worried? Garchomp is my strongest partner, it fears nothing." "That's not true," Ash said, standing up. He couldn't help himself. The feeling from Garchomp was too strong, too raw, to ignore. "It's not afraid of losing a battle. It's afraid of losing you. It pushes itself, trains until it's exhausted, because it carries the memory of every single hit you've ever taken in a battle it was in. It believes that if it were just a little bit stronger, you would never have to be in danger." Cynthia's composed exterior finally cracked. She stared at Ash, her mouth slightly agape. Her gaze shifted to her partner, who let out a low, mournful rumble, a sound of confession. It took a step forward and nudged her hand with its great head, its eyes soft with the very emotions Ash had just described. She gently placed her hand on Garchomp's snout, her fingers stroking the rough hide. She was silent for a long time. The look she shared with her Pokémon was one of profound, rediscovered understanding. The connection between them was a tangible thing in the room, a bond of love and loyalty forged over years, now laid bare and strengthened by a single, impossible revelation. Finally, she looked at Ash, and all skepticism was gone from her eyes. In its place was a look of utter, staggering belief. I never knew," she whispered. "It carried that burden alone." "They all do," Ash said softly. "We just never had a way to hear it." That was the moment everything changed. The academic curiosity in Cynthia's eyes was replaced by a fierce, protective determination. This wasn't just a legend anymore. It was real, and it was happening to the young man standing in her study. And if it was real, the legends also spoke of the dangers. Of those who would seek to control or destroy such a power. Their research began in earnest. For the next few hours, they pored over ancient texts, Cynthia translating runes that would have been meaningless to Ash. They found scattered references, fragmented prophecies. A voice that calms rage. A speaker who commands the stone, all of it pointed to a power that was meant to unite, to bring balance. Nothing suggested it was a weapon. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the study, when they were interrupted. It wasn't a knock on the door. It was a sudden, chilling drop in the ambient noise in Ash's head. The gentle murmur of the Pokémon in the town, the life in the garden outside, it all just muted, as if a switch had been flipped. "What is it?" Cynthia asked, noticing the change in his expression. "I don't know," Ash said, moving toward the window. "Something's wrong. It's too quiet." 3 sleek, black vehicles had pulled up silently in front of the research center. Men in sharp, dark gray uniforms were disembarking, moving with a fluid, disciplined efficiency that spoke of elite training. They didn't look like police or Pokémon rangers. They looked like soldiers. The door to the study slid open. A woman in an identical uniform, a lieutenant's insignia on her collar, stood there. "Champion Cynthia, Champion Ketchum," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Director Valerius would like a word. He is waiting for you in the main hall." It wasn't a request. Ash and Cynthia exchanged a look. He gave a slight nod. They followed the lieutenant out of the study. The main hall of the research center had been transformed. Aegis agents stood at every exit, their stances relaxed but ready. Standing in the center of the hall, examining a fossilized Aerodactyl skull on display, was a tall, charismatic man in a perfectly tailored suit. He turned as they entered, a polite, disarming smile on his face. This was clearly Director Valerius. "Champion Cynthia. An honor. Your work in preserving our shared history is unparalleled," he said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone. He then turned his full attention to Ash. His gray eyes were friendly, but held an unnerving analytical intensity. "And Champion Ketchum. It is a pleasure to finally meet the man who can talk down a legendary." "Who are you?" Ash asked, his hand instinctively moving toward the Pokeball on his belt. "My name is Valerius. I am the director of the Special Operations Unit known as Aegis," he said. "Our mandate is simple. To identify and neutralize global-level threats to the peaceful coexistence of humans and Pokémon. And unfortunately, Ash, your recent display on Mount Silver has put you squarely and unavoidably on our radar." "I saved that mountain," Ash countered, his voice low. "You influenced a legendary Pokémon, causing a catastrophic weather event to vanish in seconds," Valerius corrected gently. Today it was a positive outcome. Tomorrow, who can say? A power like yours, left unchecked, unstudied, is the single greatest security risk this world has ever faced. A single man who can command the loyalty of every Pokémon on the planet. History has shown us what men do with that kind of power. His logic was like a spear of ice, chilling and precise. He wasn't accusing Ash of malice. He was accusing him of being a variable too dangerous to leave to chance. So I am inviting you, Valerius continued, his smile never wavering, to accompany me to our research headquarters. We want to understand what you can do. To help you control it. To ensure, for the safety of everyone, that it is never used as a weapon. And if I say no? Cynthia asked, stepping forward, her position as Ash's ally clear and uncompromising. The smile on Valerius's face finally faded, replaced by a look of patient disappointment. This isn't a request, champion, he said, his voice losing its warmth, becoming as cold and hard as the mountain stone. We are a duly authorized international task force. We will not allow a walking weapon of mass destruction to roam freely because he prefers not to. You will come with us. The only question is whether you do so willingly. As he spoke, Ash focused his senses on the two Pokémon that flanked Valerius's top lieutenant. A massive, gleaming Metagross and a stoic, hovering Magnezone. He reached out with his mind, expecting to feel their loyalty, their thoughts, their spirit. He found nothing. There was no pride, no anger, no loyalty, no fear. There was only a cold, silent void. A blank slate of perfect, unquestioning obedience. It was as if their very souls had been scooped out, leaving behind nothing but a biological machine that followed orders. The silence from them was more terrifying than any scream he had heard on Mount Silver. He looked from the hollow Pokémon back to the smiling, reasonable face of Director Valerius and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Sinnoh air. This man wasn't just a threat. He was a perversion of everything Ash and the entire world believed about the bond between humans and Pokémon. And he had just been declared this man's #1 enemy. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The aegis trapped the air in the Celestic Research Center grew thick and heavy, charged with unspoken violence. Director Valerius stood in the center of the hall, a monument to calm, ruthless authority. His words, "This isn't a request," echoed in the sudden, profound silence. Outside the grand windows, the evening mist of Celestic Town swirled, obscuring a world that had, in the space of a heartbeat, become a cage. Aegis agents, positioned with tactical perfection, were the bars. Ash's mind was a storm. He felt the cold, empty void of the Metagross and Magnezone, a chilling psychic silence that was fundamentally wrong. He felt the nervous, suppressed energy of the agent's other Pokémon, creatures trained for combat but now caught in a standoff they didn't understand. Their confusion and anxiety were low thrum in his head. And beside him, he felt Cynthia's incandescent fury, a tightly controlled inferno of outrage, and beneath it, the low, predatory growl of her Garchomp, a promise of imminent, devastating bloodshed. "You've made a grave mistake, Director," Cynthia said, her voice dangerously quiet. Her hand had drifted to the Pokeball at her belt, her fingers resting lightly on the release mechanism. Threatening a champion in her own region is tantamount to a declaration of war. Valerius offered a placating gesture, a parent calming a child. "Please, champion. Let's not be dramatic. This is a matter of global security, which supersedes regional authority. My mandate comes from a council whose existence you are not cleared to know about. We are not the villains here. We are the architects of a lasting peace." "There's no peace in what you do to your Pokémon," Ash bit out, his eyes locked on the soulless Metagross. "I can't hear them. It's like they're not even there. What did you do to them?" A flicker of genuine surprise crossed Valerius's face, quickly masked. "Fascinating," he murmured, more to himself than to them. "You can even sense the effects of our mental conditioning. The Aegis Protocol. We remove the chaotic, unpredictable elements of emotion and instinct, creating the perfect soldier. Loyal, efficient, and unburdened by fear or doubt. We see it as a kindness." That was it. That was the final line. The casual, clinical description of such a monstrous act broke the last thread of restraint in Ash. He didn't need to discuss this. He didn't need to negotiate. This man and his entire organization were a cancer on the world he had sworn to protect. He didn't draw a Pokeball. He didn't shout a command. He met Garchomp's eyes and sent a single, clear thought, a feeling, an image. The floor. Right under the Metagross. Dragon Rush, now. The thought traveled and was understood in the same infinitesimal moment. Cynthia felt the surge of intent, her own instincts screaming in unison with Ash's silent command. Garchomp roared. It wasn't a warning, it was the sound of the world breaking. The land shark Pokémon exploded into motion, its body cloaked in a shimmering, draconic aura of pure blue energy. It didn't charge the Aegis Pokémon. It slammed its claws into the polished marble floor, channeling the full, cataclysmic power of the Dragon Rush downward. The floor shattered. Marble and foundation stone erupted, the concussive force throwing the agents and their Pokémon off balance. The Metagross, its analytical mind unable to predict such a self-destructive and seemingly illogical tactic, was thrown into the air as the ground beneath it disintegrated. "Go!" Ash yelled, the word breaking the spell of the standoff. The escape was on. Pikachu leapt from Ash's shoulder, a yellow thunderbolt arcing through the dust-filled air. Before the first Aegis agent could even raise his weapon, a thunderbolt slammed into the ceiling, bringing down light fixtures and plaster in a shower of sparks and debris, creating a screen of chaos. Cynthia was already moving, her black coat flaring behind her. "Spiritomb, Shadow Ball," she commanded, releasing her second Pokémon. The Keystone Pokémon materialized from its ball, a swirling vortex of malevolent glee, and began firing spheres of dark energy at the Aegis positions, not to maim, but to sow confusion and block lines of sight. The Aegis agents recovered with chilling speed. They weren't panicked. They were professionals adapting to a new tactical reality. "Containment fields, now," the lieutenant shouted, her voice cutting through the din. "Subdue the targets. Non-lethal force authorized." Shields of hexagonal, golden light shimmered into existence between the agents, absorbing Spiritomb's attacks. Several agents armed with rifle-like devices fired, not beams of energy, but focused waves of sound. Ash felt them in his mind before he heard them with his ears. A high-frequency pulse designed to disrupt a Pokémon's nervous system. It was the same family of technology they had used on Lugia. Pikachu, dodge left. Greninja, shadow screen, Ash thought, a split-second premonition of the attack vector guiding his mental command. Pikachu juked, the sound wave searing the air where it had just been. Greninja materialized beside Ash, slamming its hands together. A swirling wall of shadow rose from the floor, and the next volley of sonic blasts dissipated harmlessly against it. It was a perfect, seamless coordination, faster than any verbal order could have achieved. Valerius had retreated to the back of the hall, flanked by two guards. He wasn't afraid, he was observing, his expression one of intense, academic fascination as he watched Ash fight. He was seeing his worst fears and his most valuable data confirmed in real time. The hollow Metagross, recovering from the floor's collapse, righted itself in midair. Its cold, digital eyes glowed. There was no rage, no instinct, just pure tactical analysis. It calculated the optimal attack vector to neutralize the biggest threat. Garchomp. A meteor mash, its steel claws glowing with cosmic energy, rocketed toward the dragon. But Cynthia was a master strategist. Garchomp, dig. Garchomp vanished into the hole it had created, the meteor mash striking empty air with a sickening crunch of metal on stone. "Their coordination is perfect," the lieutenant reported to Valerius over her comms, her face grim as she took cover behind a pillar. "The subject seems to be anticipating our every move." "Of course he is," Valerius's voice replied, calm and steady in her earpiece. "He can hear their intent. Do not rely on standard battle tactics. Use Protocol Chimera. Overwhelm his processing ability." Suddenly, the Aegis agents changed tactics. They stopped aiming. They stopped trying to predict. They simply unleashed a flood of attacks, a chaotic, incoordinated barrage from every direction. Beams of energy, sonic pulses, and physical attacks filled the hall, a sensory overload designed to make it impossible for Ash to track every threat. It almost worked. Ash felt the sheer volume of hostile intent as a physical pressure, a psychic migraine. Too much, too many. "Then don't think. Just feel," a voice whispered in his mind. It was Cynthia's. He glanced at her. She wasn't speaking, but her eyes were locked on his, a silent communication passing between them. A champion's intuition meeting his new, impossible power. "We move as one." He nodded, taking a deep breath and letting go of conscious thought. He opened himself up to the flow of the battle, trusting his partners, trusting her. What followed was a symphony of combat. Ash's Greninja used its water shuriken to intercept incoming attacks with impossible precision. Cynthia's Roserade, now released, sent a storm of glowing petals into the air, aromatherapy, not to heal, but to create a sweet-smelling, disorienting fog that clouded the Aegis agents' thermal scopes. Garchomp burst from the ground behind a squad of agents, scattering them with a savage dragon claw. Pikachu became a living spark, ricocheting off walls and pillars, its agility making it an impossible target as it discharged small, precise jolts of electricity to disable the agents' energy shields. They weren't fighting to win. They were fighting their way toward the main entrance, a 50-foot path that felt like miles. Ash saw an agent aiming a device at Cynthia's back. Before he could even form the thought, Sceptile was there, a leaf blade deflecting the blast into the ceiling. He hadn't even realized he'd released it from its ball. His instincts, amplified by the chorus of minds around him, were now moving faster than his conscious mind. They reached the grand oak doors and burst through them, spilling out into the cold, misty evening of Celestic Town. The fight in the research center had lasted less than a minute. But it was far from over. The town was locked down. The silent, black Aegis vehicles blocked the main roads, and agents were rappelling from the rooftops, forming a perimeter. Red laser sights cut through the mist from every direction. "They're trying to box us in," Cynthia yelled, recalling her Spiritomb and Roserade to conserve their energy. "Then we don't use the roads," Ash replied, his mind already racing, reaching out, past the cold silence of the Aegis Pokémon, to the life that teemed just beyond the town's edge. He cast his senses into the dense pine forests that blanketed the slopes of Mount Coronet. He felt the skittish energy of a herd of Standler, the territorial anger of a hive of Beedrill, the sleepy, subterranean consciousness of a colony of Onyx. He focused on the Standler herd first, sending them not a command, but a feeling of urgent warning. He projected the image of the Aegis vehicles, the scent of their ozone-emitting engines, framing them as an invasive, predatory threat. Danger. Flee. South. Now. A moment later, from the woods to the north, a wave of brown bodies crashed through the tree line. The Standler herd, antlers lowered, charged through the center of the town, their panicked flight a perfect, chaotic diversion. Aegis agents scrambled to get out of their way, their carefully constructed perimeter instantly broken. "This way!" Ash yelled, grabbing Cynthia's hand and pulling her into a narrow alley between two old houses. The contact sent a jolt through both of them, a spark of shared adrenaline. "What did you just do?" she asked, her breath coming in ragged gasps as they ran. "I asked for a distraction," he said simply. They were happy to help. They emerged from the alley at the town's edge, the forest just 100 yards away across an open field. But a squad of Aegis agents was already there, forming a line, their weapons raised. Leading them was the Magnezone, its three bodies orbiting each other with a silent, menacing grace. "We're not going to make it across that," Garchomp projected, a feeling of grim certainty. "We're not going over it," Ash thought back. He cast his mind downward, deep into the earth, searching. He found what he was looking for. "We're going under." He turned his mental voice to the deep, slow-thinking colony of Onyx he had sensed earlier. He sent them a feeling of kinship, the sense of the mountain, of stone and pressure. He showed them the image of the Aegis agents on the surface, their heavy boots and machines, a dissonant, irritating weight on the skin of the earth. He didn't ask them to fight. He just asked them to shift. The ground in front of the Aegis line trembled. Then, with a great groaning of rock and soil, the head of a massive onyx erupted from the earth, its stony body twisting toward the sky. It wasn't attacking. It was simply surfacing, a subterranean giant breaching into the air. The Aegis agents scattered as two more onyx followed, their immense bodies forming a temporary, moving wall of living rock between the fugitives and their pursuers. "Now!" Cynthia shouted, and they sprinted for the tree line, using the colossal Pokémon as cover. They plunged into the darkness of the ancient forest, the shouts of the agents and the grinding of the onyx fading behind them. For a time, there was only the sound of their frantic footsteps on damp earth and their own ragged breathing. The forest was a labyrinth of ancient trees and moss-covered stones. Ash kept his senses extended, a living radar. He could feel the Aegis patrols moving through the woods, their movements coordinated, sweeping in a grid pattern. They were being herded. They're trying to push us east, toward the river, Ash panted, slowing to a walk as they took cover behind a fallen log. There's no cover there. It's a kill zone. Cynthia leaned against the log, trying to catch her breath. She looked at him, her gray eyes luminous in the dim light filtering through the canopy. What you're doing, Ash, it's more than I could have imagined. You're not commanding them. You're conducting them. It's like the entire forest is your orchestra. It feels more like I'm just asking for directions, he admitted, a wry smile touching his lips, and hoping they don't send me off a cliff. A twig snapped nearby. Instantly, they were silent, pressing themselves flat against the log. Ash felt them, a three-agent patrol, moving slowly, methodically, their senses augmented by thermal goggles. And with them, an Arcanine. Ash could feel its mind, a well of fierce loyalty to its trainer, its senses sharp, its nose to the ground. It was a tracker. It smells this, Ash realized with a jolt of panic. The Arcanine's mental voice was a low growl of discovery. Pray here, master. They were cornered. The patrol was less than 30 feet away, closing in. Just as the lead agent raised his hand to signal, the forest canopy above them exploded. A furious, buzzing roar filled the air as a massive swarm of beedrill, their stingers gleaming like polished needles, descended from their hive. Ash had sent them a single, desperate plea. A feeling of invasion, of a threat to their nest. The Aegis agents, caught completely by surprise, yelled in alarm, firing their energy weapons wildly into the swarm. In the chaos, a stray crimson beam from an agent's rifle ricocheted off a tree and struck the Arcanine. The great fire dog yelped, a sound of pure agony, and collapsed, a smoking, cauterized wound on its side. Ash felt the Arcanine's pain as if it were his own. A sharp, searing agony, followed by a wave of confusion and a rapidly dimming consciousness. The light of its spirit was fading. He heard its panicked, dying thoughts. Master hurts cold dark. The agent leading the patrol, a grim-faced man with a commander's insignia, rushed to his partner's side. He cursed, pulling a canister from his belt. Arcanine, return. He shouted, aiming the red beam of his Pokeball. Don't. The word ripped from Ash's throat. He stood up from behind the log, his hands raised, his heart pounding. Cynthia stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. What was he doing? The Aegis agents immediately snapped their weapons toward him, their laser sights painting red dots on his chest. Don't recall it, Ash repeated, his voice strained but clear, ignoring the guns aimed at him. He looked directly at the commander, who stood frozen, his hand hovering over his fallen Pokémon. The blast cauterized the main artery, but it shattered the ribs underneath. If you recall it, the dematerialization pressure will collapse its lung. It will die before the Pokémon Center can even touch it. The commander stared at him, his face a mask of shock and suspicion. How could you possibly know that? Because I can hear it, Ash yelled, his desperation making his voice raw. It's telling me, it's scared, it doesn't want to die. Use a potion, now, directly on the wound. The chemical compounds will stabilize the tissue. Then use a full heal to counteract the shock to its system. You have to do it in that order. Silence. The other two agents looked at their commander, their rifles still trained on Ash, but their certainty wavering. The beedrill swarm, their territorial rage satisfied, was already retreating. In the sudden quiet, the Arcanine's pained, shallow breathing was the only sound. The commander looked from Ash's desperate, pleading face to the fading light in his partner's eyes. Everything he had been told about the target. That he was a weapon, a threat, a monster to be contained. Warred with what he was seeing. This wasn't the action of a monster. This was the act of a trainer. With a curse, he dropped to his knees, holstering his recaller. He fumbled at his belt, producing a potion and then a full heal, his hands moving to follow Ash's instructions. He sprayed the potion onto the grievous wound, and the Arcanine, which had been whimpering, seemed to relax slightly, its breathing evening out. That was all the time they needed. Cynthia didn't waste the opportunity. She grabbed Ash's arm. Ash, come on. She pulled him back into the shadows of the forest, and they ran, leaving the stunned Aegis squad behind. Ash glanced back once. He saw the commander cradling his Arcanine's head, the Pokémon now breathing steadily, its life saved. The man looked up, his eyes meeting Ash's across the clearing. In them, Ash saw not hatred, but a flicker of profound, world-shattering doubt. They ran until their lungs burned, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the Aegis patrols. Finally, Cynthia led them to a dead end. A sheer rock face, part of the mountain's foundational bedrock, hidden in a small, secluded clearing. "Here," she said, breathing heavily. She ran her hands over the rock, feeling for something Ash couldn't see. Her fingers found a small, almost invisible seam in the stone. She pushed. With a low groan of grinding rock, a section of the cliff face receded, revealing a dark, narrow opening. "The old Sinnoh passages," she explained, gesturing for him to enter. "They say the first settlers built them to move around the mountain without disturbing the powerful Pokémon that lived on the surface. Most of them have collapsed, but I know a few that are still stable. It's not much, but it'll get us off the grid." Ash looked from the dark, unwelcoming tunnel back in the direction they had come. He was a champion. He was supposed to be a hero, a symbol of strength and light. Now he was a fugitive, hunted by a clandestine army, about to flee into the bowels of the earth. He nodded, recalling Sceptile, and followed her in. Pikachu leapt from his shoulder onto the stone floor, its cheeks sparking, ready to light the way. As Cynthia pushed the stone door shut from the inside, plunging them into absolute darkness, the weight of their new reality finally settled on him. The roar of battle was gone, replaced by the damp silence of the earth. They were safe, for now. But they were alone, and the world above was now controlled by an enemy who saw kindness as a weakness and souls as a chaotic element to be deleted. He looked at Cynthia, her silhouette barely visible in the faint glow from Pikachu's cheeks. They had survived. They had worked as one, a seamless unit of power and instinct. In the heat of the chase, he had felt a connection, a trust that went beyond a simple alliance. He had put his life in her hands, and she in his. "Thank you," he said, the words feeling small and inadequate. "Back there, I wouldn't have. We survived, Ash," she cut him off, her voice soft but firm in the darkness. "That's all that matters. Now we have to figure out how to fight back." He nodded, the last of his adrenaline fading, leaving a cold, hard resolve in its place. He was no longer just the champion of Alola. He was the only person in the world who could hear its soul, and he would not let it be silenced. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The whispering deep. The darkness inside the mountain was absolute. It was a thick, ancient blackness, untouched by moon or star, the kind that felt heavy against the skin. The only light came from the soft, steady glow of Pikachu's cheeks, a small, defiant sun in a subterranean world. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of wet stone and deep earth, a smell older than the trees on the surface. For the first few hours, they moved in silence, the only sounds the soft scuff of their boots on the stone floor and the gentle drip of water seeping through cracks in the ceiling. This was a different kind of quiet from the one Valerius's Pokémon projected. That had been a void, a sterile emptiness. This was a silence that was full, teeming with a slow, deep life. Ash, walking with a hand resting on the rough-hewn stone wall, let his senses drift outwards, downwards. He felt the Pokémon that lived in the rock itself. He felt the patient, slumbering consciousness of Geodude embedded in the walls, their thoughts less like words and more like geological pressures, dreams of erosion and tectonic shift. Deeper still, he sensed the colossal, serpentine forms of Onyx and Steelix, their minds moving with the ponderous grace of continents. They dreamt of millennia, of the slow crushing weight of the mountain above and the geothermal fire below. It was overwhelming, but in a completely different way than the stampede had been. This wasn't a scream of terror. It was the deep, resonant hum of the planet's very bones. It was a perspective that made his own life, his own desperate flight, feel infinitesimally small. "They know we're here," he murmured, his voice startlingly loud in the enclosed space. Cynthia, walking just ahead of him, turned. "The Pokémon?" "All of them," he replied, his gaze distant. "They don't see us as a threat. We're just passing through. Like a breeze in a long, slow dream." He shook his head, trying to clear the vast, ancient thoughts that weren't his own. It's hard to stay focused. Their minds, they're so old. "These tunnels were built to be ignored," Cynthia said, her voice a comforting point of human focus in the immense dark. She ran her hand over a series of faint, worn carvings on the wall, barely visible in Pikachu's light. The people who made them revered the great Pokémon of the mountain. They believed that to walk on the surface was to trespass in the homes of gods. So they moved through the veins of the earth, like blood, never disturbing the skin. Her knowledge was a lifeline for him, While he was struggling to keep from drowning in the raw, planetary consciousness, she was navigating by history, by the tangible marks left by people long dead. They were a team, each providing what the other lacked. He was the compass feeling the living world, she was the mapmaker reading the dead one. They walked for what felt like days, stopping to rest when exhaustion claimed them, sharing the rations Cynthia had the foresight to pack in her travel bag. In the quiet moments, they talked. He told her about his journey through the regions, about the friends he'd made, about the legendaries he'd met not as monsters or myths, but as beings with hopes and fears of their own. She, in turn, spoke of her own journey, a path not of stadiums and badges, but of libraries and ruins. She spoke of the thrill of unearthing a single forgotten sentence that could rewrite history, of the deep, abiding respect she had for the past and the lessons it held. A bond was forming between them in the deep dark, forged in shared danger and mutual respect. He saw not just the champion, but the brilliant, passionate scholar. She saw not just the powerful anomaly of a trainer, but the young man with an immense heart, buckling under a burden no one had ever carried before. After what their body clocks told them was nearly 2 days, the air began to change. The scent of damp earth was tinged with the faintest hint of salt. "We're close to an exit," Cynthia said, her pace quickening. "The network is more extensive than the records show. If my sense of direction is right, we've traveled much farther south than I anticipated." The tunnel ended in a spiral staircase carved from the living rock, leading up toward a faint circle of light. As they ascended, the salt in the air grew stronger, the sound of the wind replacing the dripping water. They emerged, blinking in the bright, hazy sunlight, not onto a mountainside, but into a small, secluded sea cave. Through the mouth of the cave, Ash could see a brilliant turquoise ocean stretching to the horizon under a pale, humid sky. The air was thick, warm, and wet. "This isn't Sinnoh," Ash stated, looking at the unfamiliar, tropical foliage clinging to the cliffs outside. "No," Cynthia agreed, pulling a digital map from her bag. After a moment, she pointed. "Judging by the constellations last night and the coastal geography, we're in Hoenn." Hoenn. A wave of relief washed over Ash. He had friends here. Allies. People who wouldn't just see him as a weapon. "Stephen," he said, the name a statement of intent. "Stephen Stone," Cynthia nodded in agreement. "President of the Devon Corporation and the former champion of the Hoenn League. He has political influence, immense resources, and most importantly, he has the trust of the global Pokémon League. He's the perfect person to bring into this." Getting to him was the problem. They were fugitives. Every communication they made would be monitored. Every flight they took would be tracked. But Cynthia's resourcefulness, honed by years of navigating treacherous political and academic circles, found a way. A series of anonymous cash transactions through untraceable networks, a booking on a rusty cargo ship hauling Pokeblocks from Lily Cove to Slateport, and 2 days later, they were walking the bustling, sun-drenched streets of the port city. They found Stephen not in his high-tech office in Rustboro, but on the Slateport coast, standing on the observation deck of the Oceanic Museum. He stood beside a man with elegant, flowing blue hair and dramatic robes. Wallace. The Pseutopolis gym leader and a powerful trainer in his own right. They weren't admiring the view. They were watching the horizon with grim, worried expressions. "Stephen, Wallace," Ash called out as they approached. Both men turned, their faces a mixture of surprise and relief. "Ash, Cynthia," Stephen exclaimed, striding forward to shake their hands. He was tall, dressed in his usual impeccable suit, his silver hair catching the light. "We've been trying to reach you. The League is in an uproar. There are whispers of a rogue international task force, and that you're both somehow involved." "It's more than whispers, Stephen," Cynthia said, her tone grave. "We need your help." Before they could explain further, Wallace raised a hand, his gaze fixed on the sea. "Later," he said, his voice tight with tension. "We have a more immediate problem." Ash turned his attention to the ocean and immediately felt what had them so concerned. The air was too hot, the humidity a suffocating blanket. The sea, which should have been a cool, inviting blue, was a strange, sickly teal, and steam was rising from its surface in lazy curls. Far out on the horizon, a bank of dark, purple clouds was gathered in a tight, unnatural spiral. A hurricane, sitting perfectly still. His psychic senses, now finely tuned, reached out over the water. He felt a wave of sheer panic from the Pokémon in the sea. The sharp, frantic terror of 1,000 Magikarp, the deep, guttural anxiety of the Whalmer, the pained confusion of the tentacruel. The entire marine ecosystem was screaming. And beneath it all, at the heart of the storm, he felt a single, titanic consciousness, thrashing in a cage of pure agony. It was a feeling he recognized, the pain of a legendary. As if summoned by his attention, the sea began to boil. A massive waterspout erupted from the waves, and from its base, an immense, crimson form rose. Kyogre. But it was wrong. Its body was contorted, its movements jerky and violent. Its eyes, normally so intelligent and ancient, glowed with a feral, malevolent red light, the same feverish glow he had seen in Lugia's. It let out a roar, a sound that was not one of power, but of torment, and a colossal tidal wave began to form, a wall of water rising up to threaten Slateport itself. "It's been like this for hours," Wallace shouted over the rising wind, his melodic already slithering into the water, a shimmering beacon of grace against the rising chaos. "Its power is out of control. We've been trying to calm it, but it's not listening." Steven's expression was grim. He was already holding a Pokeball. "My Metagross can create a psychic barrier, but I don't know if it can hold against a direct assault of that magnitude. We may have to drive it back." Drive it back. A euphemism for a battle that would level the coastline and boil the sea. But Ash knew it wouldn't work. He felt the truth of the situation with sickening certainty. "Don't attack it," Ash yelled, his voice sharp. "It's not in control of itself." Steven and Wallace turned to him, their faces etched with confusion. "It's like Lugia," Ash explained, struggling to find the words. "Something's inside its mind. A parasite. It's poisoning it, turning its power into a weapon. Fighting it will just make it stronger." He could feel it now, a cold, sharp presence wrapped around Kyogre's vast consciousness like a thorned vine. It was a thing of pure, cold logic, devoid of emotion, and it was using Kyogre's pain as a lever to manipulate its power. He didn't know what it was, but he recognized the texture of its malice. The same cold, alien wrongness from his vision of Giratina. "What are you suggesting?" Steven asked, his analytical mind trying to process the impossible. Ash looked from the terrified city behind them to the tormented god in the sea. There was only one option. A terrifying, insane option. "You have to get me to it. I have to get inside its head. I have to pull that thing out." "Ash, that's suicide," Cynthia cried, grabbing his arm. "The psychic feedback from Lugia nearly killed you. Kyogre's power is on another scale entirely. Do you see another choice?" He shot back, his gaze unwavering. "We can let it destroy the city, or I can try." For a long moment, no one spoke. There was only the roar of the wind and the hiss of the steaming sea. Steven looked at Ash, seeing not a reckless boy, but a champion making a terrible, necessary choice. He looked at Cynthia's terrified but resolute face. He made his decision. "Wallace, you and I will run interference," Steven declared, his voice ringing with authority. "We'll draw its fire. Create a window for Ash. It won't be long, so make it count." He released his Metagross, the colossal, steel Pokémon hovering over the waves with an impassive, powerful grace. "Get him there, Skarmory." Ash didn't hesitate. He recalled his own team. He needed them for what was to come, and leapt onto the back of Steven's steel bird. "Pikachu, you're with me. I'm going to need you, buddy." "Always," came the instant, fierce reply in his mind. Skarmory shot forward, a silver streak against the dark storm clouds. Below them, the battle began. Wallace's melodic summoned a safeguard, a shimmering veil of light to protect the coast, while Metagross unleashed a psychic barrier, a transparent wall of mental energy that met the first tidal wave with a deafening crash. The diversion had begun. The flight into the hurricane was a nightmare. The wind was a solid wall, and rain lashed down like needles. Kyogre, its attention drawn by Metagross and Melodic, thrashed in the water below, sending up geysers of superheated steam and random blasts of ice beam that froze entire sections of the ocean in an instant. As they got closer, Ash could feel the alien presence intensify, a spike of cold static in his mind. It sensed him. It knew what he was trying to do. A beam of pure origin energy, a shimmering blue pulse, shot up from the water, aimed directly at them. "Break right," Ash yelled. Skarmory veered sharply, the beam missing them by inches but the concussive force nearly throwing him from his perch. "Pikachu, I need a shield," Ash shouted. He poured his own aura into his partner, a river of blue energy enveloping the small yellow Pokémon. Pikachu's body began to crackle, not with yellow lightning, but with the pure, blue-white energy of Ash's life force. It was a technique they had perfected in training, a way to focus his power. "Get me right above it," Ash commanded Skarmory. The steel bird dove. They were now directly in the eye of the maelstrom, with the raging, possessed form of Kyogre just 100 feet below. Ash took a deep breath. He stood up on Skarmory's back, a feat of balance that should have been impossible in the gale force winds. "Okay, buddy," he said to Pikachu, who was now glowing like a miniature star on his shoulder. "When I go in, it's going to hurt. A lot. I need you to be my anchor. Take the energy, all of it, and ground it. Don't let it break me." Pikachu gave a determined cry. Ash closed his eyes. He leapt. He wasn't just falling through the air. He was diving headfirst into the raging sea of Kyogre's consciousness. He slammed into its mental shields, not with force, but with a plea, a projection of shared understanding. He sent it the memory of Lugia's pain, the feeling of the clean, quiet depths it called home. "I am here to help. Let me in." The psychic shriek that answered him was a blade of ice in his soul. The alien presence fought back, but he had created a crack in the wall of pain. He slipped through. The world vanished, replaced by a mindscape of unimaginable chaos. He was in a black, endless ocean, tossed by waves the size of mountains under a sky of perpetual lightning. This was Kyogre's mind, poisoned and tormented. And in the center of it all, wrapped around a faintly glowing orb of pure blue light that was Kyogre's true self, was the parasite. It was a shard of glittering, black crystal, pulsing with a cold, anti-light. It radiated pure, dispassionate logic. As he approached, it spoke to him, its voice a symphony of breaking glass and static in his mind. Less than error. Biological chaos detected. Sentience is a flaw. Emotion is a corruption. This vessel will be sterilized and repurposed. You will be deleted. Greater than. Ash felt a wave of pure psychic force, a negation of everything he was. It wasn't an attack. It was an attempt to unmake him, to convince his very soul that he was a statistical anomaly that needed to be corrected. He cried out in agony, his physical body, still falling toward the real ocean, convulsing. On his shoulder, Pikachu's body flared, absorbing the psychic backlash, its small form trembling with the strain. The blue aura shield around it flickered violently. Ash fought back. He couldn't use logic. He couldn't use force. So he used the one thing the entity could not comprehend. He used his heart. He reached out and grabbed the black, crystalline shard. It was cold enough to burn. Then, he poured his memories, his feelings, his very essence into it. He showed it the joy of hatching a Pokémon egg, the bitter sting of a league loss, the fierce pride of watching his Charizard finally obey him, the quiet loyalty of Pikachu sleeping at the foot of his bed. He showed it his unwavering, illogical, chaotic love for his friends, for his family, for every single Pokémon he had ever met. He flooded its cold, sterile logic with the beautiful, messy, contradictory reality of life. The entity recoiled. Less than irrational. Meaningless. Data is corrupt. Greater than. The corruption is the meaning, Ash roared back, his voice the only sound in the mental ocean. He focused all his will, all his love, all his bonds into a single point of pressure. You don't belong here. Get out. With a final, desperate surge of will, he pushed. The black crystal fractured. It did not shatter. It was simply ejected. Expelled from Kyogre's consciousness with a soundless, psychic boom. Back in the real world, Ash's body went limp. His freefall ended as Charizard, released from its ball at the last possible second by his subconscious will, caught him gently on its back. The psychic backlash, no longer focused on him, dissipated. Kyogre's massive body went still in the water below. The malevolent red light in its eyes faded. The hurricane, its engine of pain now gone, collapsed in on itself. The wind died. The rain stopped. The clouds parted, allowing brilliant, clean sunlight to pierce through. Kyogre raised its head, its ancient, sapphire eyes finding Ash on Charizard's back. It sent a feeling, a pure, clean wave of immense gratitude and a profound, soul-deep apology for the damage it had caused. Then, with a graceful flick of its tail, it dove, vanishing into the calm, quiet depths where it belonged. The fight was over. The strain, both physical and psychic, finally overwhelmed Ash. his world faded to black. Far away, on a small, uninhabited island south of Hoenn, a cloaked Aegis craft touched down silently. An agent in a hazardous materials suit walked to a small crater in the sand where a shard of glittering black crystal lay, pulsing faintly. It was the entity Ash had expelled. It was inert, for now. The agent carefully placed it in a containment unit. Miles away, in his airborne command center, Director Valerius watched the live feed. The image of the strange, black crystal filled the main screen. Fascinating, Valerius breathed, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. It seems Champion Ketchum is not the source of the anomaly, but merely a conduit for it. This is the source of his power. He had misunderstood everything. He believed Ash was channeling this cold, alien energy, not fighting it. He saw the black shard not as a parasite, but as the key. Have it brought to the lab immediately, he commanded, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous new idea. I want every test imaginable run on it. If we can understand this energy, we can replicate it. We can control it. He looked at the tactical map, at the blinking dot that was now Slateport City. Why contain the weapon, he mused to the empty room, when you can build a better one? Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Champions Summit. Ash awoke slowly, dragged from a deep and dreamless sleep by the scent of clean linen and the faint, salty breeze of the Hoenn coast. For a moment, he felt a profound sense of peace, the psychic hum of the world a gentle, distant melody rather than a demanding chorus. The exhaustion was a physical presence, a leaden weight in his bones, but the sharp, tearing agony of his mental battle was gone. He was whole. He opened his eyes. He was in a spacious, sunlit room, the minimalist decor a blend of modern technology and traditional Hoenn art. A wall of glass offered a panoramic view of the turquoise ocean, now calm and sparkling. Pikachu was curled up on his chest, a small, warm weight, its breathing in sync with his own. Welcome back. The voice was calm and familiar. Stephen Stone sat in a chair by the window, impeccably dressed as always, a data slate resting on his knee. He offered Ash a small, reassuring smile. You were out for nearly 3 days. We were starting to get worried. Ash sat up, carefully shifting Pikachu onto the bed beside him. 3 days? He croaked, his throat dry. Kyogre, the city? Slateport is safe, Stephen assured him. Thanks to you. The official story is that a sudden atmospheric anomaly caused the brief weather event, which was contained by the combined efforts of myself and Wallace. The truth is a bit more complicated. He gestured to the data slate. And the world is starting to demand answers. He turned the slate toward Ash. The screen was filled with news feeds from across the globe. The headlines were a chaotic storm of fear and speculation. Champion Ketchum. Hero OR hoax. Video emerges of Mount Silver, miracle. Sinnoh lockdown. Eyewitnesses report battle at Celestic Research Center. WHO or the Aegis operatives? League officials remain silent. The Ketchum anomaly. Experts warn of unprecedented power. They were being painted as fugitives and terrorists. Valerius and Aegis were shaping the narrative, leaking carefully selected footage and expert testimony that framed Ash not as a savior, but as a catalyst for destruction. The video from Mount Silver was shaky and grainy, showing him standing before the Tyranitar herd as they froze in their tracks. Without context, without the sound of his voice or the feeling of his intent, it looked like an act of terrifying, absolute control. He's making me into a monster, Ash said, his voice low and hard. Fear is a more powerful motivator than truth, Ash, came another voice from the doorway. Cynthia entered, carrying a tray with a glass of water and some food. She looked tired, the stress of the past few days visible in the faint shadows under her eyes, but her gaze was as sharp and determined as ever. Valerius isn't trying to win a debate. He's trying to win a war. And the first casualty of war is always the truth. Wallace followed her in, his usual flamboyant demeanor replaced by a grim seriousness. The Pokémon League is in chaos. The Elite Four of every region are demanding a formal inquiry. Some are calling for your immediate arrest and censure. Others are defending you. It's tearing the institution apart. Ash swung his legs out of bed, feeling a surge of anger cut through his exhaustion. Then we stop running. We stop letting him control the story. He stood up, a little unsteady on his feet, but his eyes were blazing with a newfound fire. We can't fight Aegis in the shadows. They're too powerful, too connected. We have to fight them in the light. Steven raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What do you have in mind? He wants to put me on trial, Ash said, his voice gaining strength. Fine. Let's have one. But we do it on our terms. A summit. All the regional champions, together in one place. No politicians, no military, just the strongest trainers in the world. The ones who are supposed to be the guardians of the bond between humans and Pokémon. Let Valerius make his case to them. And then, I'll make mine. The audacity of the proposal hung in the air. To willingly walk into a room with the most powerful people on the planet, people who were being told he was a threat, was an incredible risk. Cynthia was the first to smile. It was a fierce, proud expression. The Indigo Plateau, she said, her mind already working through the logistics. It's the most respected, neutral ground in the world. The birthplace of the modern Pokémon League. Lance would have to sanction it, Steven mused, tapping his chin. As the head of the G-Men and the elder statesman of the champions, his approval is paramount. But he is a man of honor. He would agree to a formal hearing. Then we call them, Ash said, his decision absolute. We call them all. We tell them the fate of the world is on the line. And we tell Valerius that if he wants his prize, he has to come and claim me in front of everyone. It was a gambit of breathtaking arrogance and desperate necessity. It was a champion's move. The chamber was circular, a grand, solemn hall deep within the heart of the Indigo Plateau. The walls were carved from white marble, inlaid with veins of gold, and depicted scenes from the history of the League. Red's legendary victory, Lance's battles with Team Rocket, Cynthia's ascension in Sinnoh. In the center of the room was a large, round table of polished mahogany, around which were arranged 8 high-backed chairs. This was the Hall of Champions, a place so sacrosanct that it had been convened only a handful of times in the last century. Ash stood on one side of the room with Cynthia, Steven, and Wallace, his allies forming a small, defiant bastion. His heart was pounding, but he projected an aura of calm he didn't entirely feel. He had spent the last 2 days resting, preparing, and centering himself, learning to filter the constant psychic noise of the world into a manageable hum. One by one, the other champions arrived. Lance was the first, his imperious presence and flowing cape filling the room. His Dragonite walked beside him, its normally gentle eyes filled with a grim seriousness. Then came Alder, the former champion of Unova, his wild hair and relaxed posture a stark contrast to the tension in the room. His Bouffalante snorted impatiently. Diantha, the champion of Kalos, entered with an elegant grace, her Gardevoir at her side, its ethereal form radiating a palpable concern for its trainer. Finally, with a flourish of a cape and a confident grin that didn't quite reach his eyes, came Leon, the unbeatable champion of Galar, his famous Charizard taking a position behind him, its fiery tail swaying slowly, a metronome counting down to a confrontation. They were a pantheon of living legends, the most powerful and respected trainers in the world. And their gazes, a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and concern, were all fixed on Ash. The final arrival was Director Valerius. He entered not as a prisoner or a petitioner, but as an equal. He was flanked by 2 of his elite Aegis agents, their faces hidden behind dark visors. He gave a polite, almost collegial nod to the assembled champions. Thank you all for agreeing to this unconventional meeting, Valerius began, his voice smooth and reasonable as he took a position opposite Ash's contingent. I know there has been a great deal of misinformation circulating. I am here to present the facts. Lance, taking his seat at the head of the table, silenced him with a raised hand. You will have your chance to speak, Director. But first, a word of warning. You are here at our sufferance. Your organization has operated in the shadows for too long, and your recent actions in Sinnoh were a flagrant violation of regional sovereignty. Tread very carefully. Valerius inclined his head. Understood, Champion Lance. For the next hour, he laid out his case. He was brilliant. He never raised his voice, never made a direct accusation of malice. He simply presented his facts, with chilling, undeniable logic. A massive holographic display bloomed in the center of the table, showing the footage from Mount Silver and the Hoenn Coast. Observe, Valerius said, as the image of Ash before the frozen Tyranitar herd played on a loop. A spontaneous, localized blizzard of impossible intensity. A stampede of apex predators. And then, a single human appears, and it all stops. He exerts some unknown influence. and their primal instincts are instantly overridden. This is not communication. This is control. He switched the display to the boiling seas off Slateport. Here, we see the legendary Pokémon Kyogre in an unprecedented state of agitation, threatening a major metropolitan area. Champion Ketchum arrives, and within minutes, the legendary is pacified and retreats. We are being asked to believe this is a coincidence. He looked around the table, his gaze meeting each champion's in turn. I do not for a moment suggest that Ash Ketchum is evil. I suggest he is something far more dangerous, a point of failure. A single human being who wields an unchecked, unstudied power to influence the most destructive forces on our planet. What happens when he has a moment of anger? A moment of grief? What happens when a man who can quell a god's rage decides, for his own reasons, to incite it instead? My organization was created to prevent such a catastrophe. To study and, if necessary, contain such threats before they manifest. All we ask is to be allowed to do our job. He finished, and the room was thick with a heavy, troubled silence. He had masterfully preyed on their deepest fears as guardians of the peace. He had made his case not with emotion, but with the cold, hard logic of risk assessment. Ash could see the doubt taking root in Alder's and Diantha's eyes. Lance turned his stern gaze to Ash. You have heard the director's assessment. What is your response? Ash took a deep breath. He walked forward, stepping into the center of the circle. He didn't look at the holographic display. He looked at the champions. Director Valerius is right about one thing, Ash said, his voice clear and steady. What I can do is dangerous. But he is fundamentally wrong about what it is. He shook his head. He shows you videos, data, and theories. He talks about my power like it's a weapon. But it's not. It's a conversation. And instead of trying to explain it, I'd rather just show you. He turned to the champion of Kanto. Lance, if you would permit me. Lance hesitated for a fraction of a second, then gave a curt nod. Ash looked past him, to the powerful, gentle-eyed Dragonite standing behind his chair. Ash didn't speak aloud. He opened his mind, his senses, and simply listened. He felt the immense, unwavering loyalty of the Dragonite, a love for its partner that was as deep and vast as the ocean. But he also felt a quiet, constant worry, a frustration. Ash's expression softened. He's proud of you, he said, his voice gentle, directed at Lance. Immensely so. He sees how much weight you carry on your shoulders, for the League, for the world. He wishes he could tell you that. He wishes he could do more than just fight for you. He worries that you see him as just a weapon in your arsenal, when all he wants is to be your partner. Lance's stern facade didn't crack, but his eyes widened slightly. Ash continued, his gaze still locked with Dragonites. He's never forgotten the time you were a boy. Hiding in the dragon's den after you failed your first trainer's exam. You were crying. You shared your last rice ball with him, even though you were starving. He's never forgotten that kindness. It's why he chose you. It's the reason he'll follow you into any fire. A sharp, collective intake of breath went around the room. Lance was completely still, his face pale. It was an intensely private memory, something no one else could possibly have known. He turned slowly and looked at his oldest friend. Dragonite let out a low, soft croon, a sound of pure affection and confirmation, and nudged its head against his shoulder. For the first time, Lance saw the full, complex depth of his partner's soul, laid bare by the young man in the center of the room. Before anyone could speak, Ash turned to the other end of the table. Leon. Leon, who had been watching with a cocky smirk, was now sitting bolt upright, his expression one of stunned disbelief. May I? Ash asked. Leon, speechless, just nodded. Ash looked at Leon's Charizard. The sheer power radiating from it was like a furnace. But Ash felt more than that. He felt a blazing, competitive fire, an addiction to battle, and an absolute, unshakable faith in its trainer's invincibility. But underneath it all, a single, sharp note of fear. He loves the fight, Ash said, his voice resonating with the Charizard's power. He loves the roar of the crowd, the feeling of your shared victory. Being unbeatable isn't a title to him. It's who you both are. It's your identity. Ash paused, then his voice dropped. But he has nightmares. He dreams of the day when he's not fast enough, not strong enough. He's not afraid of losing. He's terrified of letting you down. Of seeing the disappointment in your eyes. His greatest fear is that the day you finally lose, you'll stop seeing him as your unstoppable partner. Leon was on his feet, his chair scraping back. He stared at his Charizard, who stared back, a plume of smoke curling from its nostrils. The bond between them was legendary, but in that moment, it became something more. Deeper. More real. Leon slowly walked over and placed a hand on his Charizard's snout, his own Galar-sized confidence momentarily forgotten, replaced by a look of profound, humbled understanding. Ash had done it. He hadn't just refuted Valerius's argument, he had rendered it irrelevant. He had transformed a political debate about a security threat into a deeply personal, emotional revelation about the very nature of the bond they had all dedicated their lives to. He had shown them the souls of their partners. What Valerius and Aegis do is a perversion of this, Ash said, his voice now ringing with authority, gesturing to the two Pokémon who had just been given a voice. He doesn't understand this bond, so he fears it. He wants to erase it, to replace it with cold, empty obedience. He then raised his hand, and a new image appeared in the holographic display. It was not a recording. It was a memory, raw and unfiltered, projected directly from his mind. It was the mindscape of Kyogre, the black ocean, the lightning, and the cold, crystalline parasite wrapped around the legendary's soul. The champions saw the alien shard. They heard its voice of static and cold logic. They saw Ash rip it from Kyogre's mind. This is what attacked Lugia. This is what tortured Kyogre, Ash declared. This is our real enemy. A force that sees life itself as an error to be corrected. Aegis didn't just get it wrong. They recovered the shard I removed from Kyogre. Valerius thinks it's the source of my power. He's trying to study it. To weaponize it. He is blindly leading us all to a disaster far greater than anything he accuses me of. The room erupted. Is this true, Director? Lance demanded, his voice like thunder. Valerius's composure finally broke. A flash of genuine fury crossed his face before he masked it with a condescending sigh. A fascinating display of psychic manipulation, he said, his voice dripping with scorn. He plays on your emotions, shows you a convenient, unverifiable mental illusion, and you all forget the logical facts. The risk remains unchanged. His power, whatever its source, is a liability. The only liability I see here is you, Director, Cynthia shot back, her voice like ice. Valerius smiled, a cold, empty thing. Your opinions are noted, he said. He straightened his suit jacket and turned not to the champions, but to the invisible security cameras in the room. He was no longer speaking to them. He was speaking to his hidden council. The champions of the League have proven themselves incapable of acting with objective reasoning. They have been compromised by sentimentality. Aegis has no choice but to act unilaterally. Our mandate to protect global stability is now in effect, with or without the League's cooperation. He looked directly at Ash, his eyes promising a war without rules or restraint. The subject, Ash Ketchum, is hereby designated a global-level threat. All assets are authorized to use any means necessary for his capture and containment. This summit is over. He turned and strode out of the chamber, his agents following him like shadows, leaving a stunned and furious silence in his wake. Ash had won the battle for the hearts of the champions, but in doing so, he had just started a much larger, more dangerous war. He now had the most powerful trainers in the world as his allies, but he had also been publicly declared the world's most wanted enemy by a man who answered to no one. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The rivals echo. The tense silence in the Hall of Champions after Valerius's departure was heavier than any shout. He hadn't just walked out, he had drawn a battle line across the entire world, placing them on one side and Ash on the other. The weight of his declaration settled on the room's occupants, a chilling promise of a war fought not on battlefields, but in the shadows, on the airwaves, and in the hearts and minds of the public. Well, Leon said, breaking the quiet with a humorless chuckle, his usual swagger completely gone. That's not ideal, is it? He ran a hand through his purple hair, his gaze fixed on the empty doorway through which Valerius had disappeared. The man just declared war on the Pokémon League itself in our most sacred hall. He declared war on Ash, Lance corrected, his voice a low rumble of controlled fury. He turned to Ash, his expression grim but resolute. He is right about one thing. He has compromised us with sentimentality. My own, specifically. To know that after all these years, Dragonite carried that memory. Valerius is a fool. He thinks that's a weakness. It is the very source of our strength. But it is a weakness in the court of public opinion, Diantha countered softly, her Gardevoir shimmering beside her, sensing its trainer's distress. Valerius will not show the world your reunion with your Dragonite. He will show them the videos of rampaging Pokémon and claim you are all protecting the cause. He will paint us as sentimental old fools, blinded by our affection, unable to see the threat he so logically presents. She was right. They had the loyalty of the strongest trainers, but Valerius had the ear of the world's governments and the fear of its people. They were in an untenable position. Paragons of the establishment now forced to harbor its most wanted fugitive. Ash looked around the table at the faces of the champions, these pillars of the world he had looked up to his entire life. He saw their resolve, but he also saw the immense political pressure crashing down on them. He was the eye of the storm, and they were all being torn apart by his winds. Then we change the battlefield, Ash said, his voice cutting through the debate. All eyes turned to him. He wants to fight in the shadows? With propaganda and fear? I won't. I'm a Pokémon trainer. I'll fight him in a stadium. Alder leaned forward, stroking his beard. What are you saying, son? He's called me a monster, a weapon, an anomaly, Ash explained, his idea taking shape as he spoke. The world is scared because they don't know who I am anymore. So I have to remind them. I need to get in front of a camera, in front of the whole world, and do the one thing I've always done. I need to have a Pokémon battle. A slow grin spread across Leon's face as he grasped the sheer, mad brilliance of the strategy. A public relations blitzkrieg, he breathed, his excitement returning. He's cornered us with politics, so we answer with a spectacle. We give them a show so fantastic, so pure, it blows his narrative to pieces. I love it. It would have to be a major event, Steven added, his mind already calculating the logistics. Something official, globally broadcast. Something Aegis couldn't possibly shut down without revealing their hand. The World Coronation Series is between seasons, Leon mused, tapping his finger on the table. But we could arrange a special exhibition match. A Champions Challenge, we could host it at Winden Stadium in Galar. My home turf. I'll personally guarantee the security. But who would you battle? Wallace asked. No one in this room would fight you now, not in earnest, it would look staged. Ash's gaze became distant. He needed an opponent who was undeniably powerful, whose entire identity was built on a philosophy of strength above all else. Someone who would test him, push him, and whose defeat would be a statement. He needed a rival. A true rival. There was only one name. I know who, Ash said, his voice quiet but firm. Someone who sees Pokémon as tools for victory. Someone whose strategy is flawless, ruthless, and completely devoid of the sentimentality Valerius accused you of. Someone the world knows would never, ever throw a match. He looked at Lance. I want you to find Paul. 2 weeks later, the world's attention was focused on the massive, sprawling structure of Winden Stadium. The hastily arranged World Champions Gauntlet was the single biggest news story on the planet. The premise was simple and electrifying. Ash Ketchum, the controversial champion of Alola, would face a series of challengers handpicked by the Pokémon League to test his mettle and prove his standing. It was a masterful piece of political theater, reframing Ash's fugitive status into a heroic trial. Aegis was silent. As Leon had predicted, they couldn't make a move. To attack the stadium would be an act of overt terrorism, exposing them to the world and shattering the carefully crafted image of calm, professional authority Valerius had built. They were forced to watch, to wait for him to make a mistake. Ash stood in the waiting tunnel, the roar of the 100,000-strong crowd a physical pressure against his chest. Pikachu was on his shoulder, its body thrumming with anticipation. He wasn't nervous. He felt centered. In the 2 weeks of intense preparation, surrounded by the greatest trainers in the world, he had learned to control the voice. It was no longer a chaotic flood. He could focus it, filter it, turning the background noise of the world into a quiet hum and honing in on specific minds when he chose. He had spent hours sparring with Cynthia and Leon, not just battling, but learning to integrate his ability into his strategy, turning it from a raw power into a precision instrument. Your opponent is in the opposite tunnel. Cynthia's voice came through his earpiece. She was in the control booth with Steven and the other champions, a united front watching over him. Intel confirms it's him. Are you ready? I've been ready for this for a long time, Ash said, and he meant it. The stadium announcer's voice boomed. And now, entering from the red gate, the challenger who has battled his way through the preliminary rounds for this opportunity. A trainer known for his devastating strategies and overwhelming power. From Veilstone City in the Sinnoh region, give it up for Paul. A figure emerged into the dazzling lights of the stadium. Paul looked almost exactly as Ash remembered him. The same purple hair, the same perpetual scowl, the same air of cold, dismissive confidence. He was older, his shoulders broader, his gaze sharper, but the core of him was unchanged. He exuded an aura of pure, intimidating competence. He gave the roaring crowd a cursory glance of disdain and fixed his eyes on the opposite tunnel, on the opponent he had come to crush. And his opponent, the announcer screamed, the crowd's roar reaching a fever pitch. The center of the world's attention, the man of the hour, the champion of the Alola region, Ash Ketchum. Ash walked out into the light. He didn't wave to the crowd. He didn't smile. His entire focus was on the man across the field. Their eyes met, and in that instant, the stadium, the crowd, the world. It all faded away. It was just the two of them, as it had been so many times before. On the shores of Lake Acuity. In the finals of the Sinnoh League. A rivalry that had defined them both, now reignited on the world's biggest stage. They met in the center of the field. Ash, Paul said, his voice a low, unimpressed drawl. I heard you'd gotten yourself into some trouble. Never figured you for a politician. You don't have the stomach for it. This isn't politics, Paul, Ash replied, his voice calm. This is a Pokémon battle. The only thing that's ever mattered. Paul's lips twisted into a smirk. Good. I was hoping you'd say that. I've been waiting a long time to pay you back for the Sinnoh League. Don't disappoint me. They returned to their positions. The referees' flags went up. The entire world held its breath. This will be a full 6-on-6 battle. Let the match begin. Paul's first move was classic Paul. Aggron, stand by for battle. The massive, ironclad Pokémon appeared with a ground-shaking roar, a walking fortress of steel and aggression. Ash didn't hesitate. Infernape, I choose you. His own firefighting starter emerged in a burst of flame, beating its chest and letting out a defiant cry that echoed their long history with Paul. Ape against a walking tank. Sentimental choice, Paul sneered. Aggron, metal burst. Aggron's body glowed with a shimmering, metallic energy. It was a counter move, designed to absorb a hit and return it with double the power. Paul was baiting him, expecting a head-on, reckless assault. The old Ash would have fallen for it. But this was not the old Ash. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, focusing his senses on Paul's Aggron. He felt its mind, a simple, straightforward consciousness of immense power and defensive instinct. It was waiting for the impact. It wanted the impact. And he also felt Paul's intent, a cold, clear strategic thought projected to his Pokémon. Let him hit you. End this quick. Ash opened his eyes. Infernape, bulk up. Infernape roared and flexed, its muscles glowing with a red aura, boosting its attack and defense. It made no move to attack. The crowd murmured in confusion. Paul frowned. Fine, Paul growled. If you won't come to us, we'll come to you. Head smash. Aggron charged, its metallic head glowing with a fearsome white light, a living battering ram that could shatter mountains. Ash waited. He felt the precise trajectory, the exact moment of impact calculated in Paul's mind. At the last possible second, he spoke, his voice calm and clear. Use the tunnel, now. Infernape slammed its fists into the ground. A flare blitz, but not aimed at Aggron. It was aimed at the turf. The ground erupted, and Infernape vanished into a newly formed, flame-scorched tunnel. Aggron's head smash hit empty air, its momentum carrying it stumbling forward, off balance and exposed. Emerge and close combat. Ash commanded. Infernape burst from the ground directly beneath the staggering Aggron. A furious, blindingly fast flurry of punches and kicks rained down on Aggron's unprotected underbelly. The type disadvantage was immense. The steel behemoth roared in pain and collapsed, the swirl of unconsciousness in its eyes. The stadium was stunned into silence for a beat, then erupted. It had been a flawless, surgical takedown. Paul stared, his mouth slightly agape, before his shock hardened into a scowl. He recalled Aggron without a word. Gyarados, stand by, he roared, his frustration evident. The magnificent, terrifying sea serpent appeared, its roar of fury shaking the stadium. Aqua tail on the field. Gyarados slammed its massive tail into the ground, unleashing a wave of water that flooded the battlefield, turning it into a shallow pool. It was a move to neutralize Infernape's speed and its tunneling trick. A smart, adaptive strategy. Ash recalled Infernape. "Pikachu, let's go." Pikachu shot onto the field, its small form seeming impossibly outmatched by the raging Gyarados. The crowd screamed its name. "You're a fool," Paul yelled. "Gyarados, waterfall." A pillar of water rose up under Gyarados, and it charged forward, cloaked in the rushing torrent. Ash was calm. He could feel Gyarados' rage, a pure, elemental fury that Paul had cultivated. He could also feel the electricity crackling in the water on the field, a conductor waiting for a charge. And he knew, with absolute certainty, what Paul was thinking. He'll go for Thunderbolt. My Gyarados will endure it and finish the mouse. "Pikachu, Volt Tackle," Ash said. Pikachu cloaked itself in a blinding aura of electricity and shot forward, not at the charging Gyarados, but low, skimming across the surface of the water-logged field. Paul's eyes widened. "It's a feint. Gyarados, pivot, use Ice Fang." But it was too late. Pikachu wasn't aiming for Gyarados, it was aiming for the water beneath it. Just before impact, Ash gave the real command: discharge. Pikachu unleashed all the energy of its Volt Tackle, not in a physical strike, but in a massive, omnidirectional pulse of electricity. The entire field of water lit up, becoming a deadly conduit. Gyarados, caught in the epicenter of the electrified pool, convulsed, its massive body seizing up as 100,000 volts coursed through it. It crashed into the water, unconscious. 2 for 2. The crowd was going insane. Leon was on his feet in the champion's box, pumping his fist. "Did you see that? The timing? The strategy? It's beautiful." Cynthia watched, her expression one of intense concentration. She saw what was really happening. Ash wasn't just predicting Paul's moves. He was reading them, chapter and verse, before Paul had even decided to turn the page. Paul was visibly rattled now. The cool, detached strategist was gone, replaced by a grim-faced warrior being systematically dismantled. He sent out his Drapion, then his Honchkrow. They were both defeated by Ash's Weasel and Staraptor in battles that were shockingly brief and one-sided. Every strategy Paul devised, every feint, every surprise attack, Ash countered it with an impossibly perfect preemptive move. It was like he was living 5 seconds in the future. Finally, only 2 Pokémon remained for each of them. "Electivire, stand by," Paul roared, sending out his powerhouse. "Sceptile, I choose you," Ash countered. The battle that followed was a blur of speed and power. Sceptile was a green streak, its leaf blade clashing against Electivire's Thunder Punch. But again, Ash's prescience was the deciding factor. "Sceptile, he's anticipating the flank," Ash called out. "Use the light rigging to launch." Sceptile, reacting instantly, used Leaf Storm not as an attack, but as a method of propulsion, launching itself up toward the stadium lights, then ricocheting down at an impossible angle, catching Electivire from behind with a devastating leaf blade. It was a move of such breathtaking acrobatic and strategic genius that the audience was left speechless. Paul was down to his last Pokémon. Ash still had Sceptile in his final choice. He recalled Sceptile, saving its strength. Paul held up his final Pokeball. His expression was no longer angry, it was cold, grim, and focused. "This ends now," he said. He threw the ball. "Torterra, let's go." His Sinnoh starter. The partner he had raised from a Turtwig. The Pokémon that was the bedrock of his team. Ash looked at the massive, continent-bearing Pokémon, and then at his own final Pokeball. There was only one way this could end. One final echo of their past. "Infernape, I choose you." The fire monkey returned to the field, bruised but ready. Torterra versus Infernape. The final battle of the Sinnoh League, replayed on a global stage. The symbolism was lost on no one. "Frenzy Plant," Paul commanded. Massive, thorny vines erupted from the ground, a forest of destruction hurtling toward Infernape. "Burn them down. Flare Blitz." Ash roared. Cloaked in an armor of fire, Infernape charged into the maelstrom of vines, incinerating them as it powered through. The 2 Pokémon met in the center of the field in a cataclysmic explosion of fire and nature. When the smoke cleared, they were both standing, panting, wounded but defiant. Paul stared, his knuckles white where he gripped the railing. He couldn't understand it. He had run 1,000 simulations in his head. His strategies were perfect. There was no logical way for him to be losing this badly. It felt like Ash wasn't just battling him. He was dismantling the very philosophy of Pokémon battling he had built his life around. After the battle, which ended in a final, decisive close combat from Infernape, the stadium was a vortex of sound. Ash had won. A clean, undeniable 6-0 sweep. He had proven his point. He was a trainer, first and foremost. Later, away from the cameras and the crowds, in the quiet corridor beneath the stadium, Paul cornered him. His face was a thunderous mask. "What was that?" he demanded, his voice low and shaking with a rage that went deeper than just losing. "Don't give me some garbage about trust and friendship. I saw your face. You weren't predicting my moves. You knew. You knew what I was going to do before I did. How?" Ash looked at his old rival. He saw the confusion, the shattered pride. He deserved the truth. "I didn't know what you were going to do, Paul," Ash said quietly. "I knew what your Pokémon were going to do. I could hear them. I felt their intent." Aggron was ready for the hit. Gyarados was preparing to endure the thunderbolt. Torterra was gathering energy in its legs for the frenzy plant. "I wasn't battling you. I was having a conversation with your team." Paul stared, the blood draining from his face. The sheer, terrifying implication of what Ash was saying hit him like a physical blow. He wasn't a strategist anymore. He was an open book. "You can talk to them?" "Yes," Ash said simply. Paul took a step back, his mind, always processing the strategic angle, grasping the terrifying potential. "If you can do that," he said, his voice a horrified whisper, "what stops you from telling them all to just lie down? To just give up? What stops you from turning them against me?" It was the ultimate question. The same one Valerius had posed, now stripped of political rhetoric and laid bare in its most raw, personal form. Ash met his gaze, his expression unwavering, his voice filled with a certainty that was absolute. "The same thing that stops you from ordering your Torterra to walk off a cliff just to prove a point," he said. "It's called respect. I hear them, Paul. I feel their loyalty to you, their pride, their will to fight for you, even when you pushed them to their breaking point. I could never betray that. Ever." In that moment, Paul finally understood. He saw a power that was not about control, but about connection. A power he, with his cold, detached philosophy, could never hope to attain. He didn't say another word. He just turned and walked away, a man whose entire worldview had been irrevocably shattered. Ash watched him go, a sense of closure settling over him. He had won the battle and, he hoped, the war for public opinion. High up in the stadium's rafters, hidden in a maintenance catwalk, an Aegis sniper adjusted the scope on her rifle. It was a custom-built weapon, long and matte black, with a complex series of energy coils around the barrel. It didn't fire bullets. It fired a concentrated beam of the same dampening frequency that had tortured Lugia, now amplified and focused enough to sever a psychic connection from a mile away. "Target is isolated," she whispered into her comms. "Post-match confrontation is over. I have a clean shot. Repeat, I have a clean shot. Take it." Director Valerius's voice replied in her ear, cold and clinical. "Neutralize the anomaly." She centered the crosshairs on the back of Ash's head. Her finger tightened on the trigger. An invisible, silent beam of disruptive energy began to charge in the rifle's core. Just as she was about to fire, a playful giggle echoed in the catwalk, seemingly coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. Mew. A shimmering pink bubble of psychic energy, no bigger than a marble, materialized an inch from the rifle's barrel. The sniper fired. The dampening beam, a weapon that could cripple a god, shot from the rifle and was instantly swallowed by the tiny pink bubble. The bubble didn't pop, it simply winked out of existence, taking the hostile energy with it. The sniper stared in utter disbelief. A faint, shimmering distortion in the air in front of her resolved for a fraction of a second into the mischievous, cat-like face of the mythical Pokémon Mew, who stuck its tongue out at her before vanishing completely. "What happened?" Valerius's voice crackled in her ear. "Report." I don't know," the sniper stammered, her professional composure shattered. "The shot was deflected. Something interfered. Something impossible." Down below, Ash felt a sudden, faint tickle at the back of his neck, a fleeting sensation of playful energy and ancient power. He looked around, puzzled, but saw nothing. He just shrugged, and with Pikachu on his shoulder, turned to go meet his friends. The world was safe, for another day. But he was no longer the only impossible thing in it. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Voice of the Corrupted. The victory at Winden Stadium was a fragile, brilliant thing. For a few days, the world seemed to hold its breath, caught in the afterglow of a battle for the ages. The narrative had shifted. Valerius's carefully constructed image of Ash as a dangerous anomaly was shattered, replaced by the reality of a trainer of transcendent skill and undeniable integrity. The broadcast of his 6-0 victory over Paul had been replayed on every network, dissected by analysts, and marveled at by a new generation of trainers. He wasn't a monster, he was a master. In the secure, high-tech command center the champions had established deep within the Indigo Plateau, a temporary sense of relief had settled in. It was a war room transformed into a lounge. Leon was enthusiastically reenacting Sceptile's ricochet maneuver for a bemused Alder, while Steven and Diantha were deep in a strategic discussion about leveraging their newfound public support to force a formal investigation into Aegis. Ash stood with Cynthia by a large window overlooking a hidden valley where the champions' Pokémon were resting and recuperating. The psychic hum of the world was calmer here, a gentle symphony of contentment from some of the most powerful creatures on the planet. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the voice was not a burden but a comfort. "You're quiet," Cynthia said, her shoulder brushing against his. She wasn't looking at him, but at the valley below, where her Garchomp was in a spirited but friendly sparring match with Lance's Dragonite. "Just listening," Ash replied. He gestured to the two Pokémon. "Garchomp is telling Dragonite that his flying is sloppy for a dragon. And Dragonite is telling Garchomp that his face is sloppy for a dragon." Cynthia let out a soft laugh, a sound that seemed to make the sterile command center a little warmer. "So, the complex inner lives of our partners mostly revolve around trash talk. I should have known." "It's more than that," Ash said, his expression turning serious. "They're happy. Relaxed. For the first time in weeks. They can feel the difference, too. They know we won." "We won a battle, Ash," she corrected gently, finally turning to look at him. Her gray eyes were soft, but held a familiar analytical spark. "Valerius is still out there. He's been completely silent since Winden. That's what worries me." "I know," he sighed, leaning his head against the cool glass. The victory felt immense, but also strangely hollow. He had proven his point, but the fundamental threat remained. The black, crystalline entity was still a terrifying, unanswered question, and Valerius now possessed a piece of it. "It's like we won the league, but the real champion is still waiting for us." "That's a good way of putting it," she said. There was a comfortable silence between them, the kind that exists only between people who have faced death together. "What you did in that battle, it wasn't just about winning. You gave them a voice, Ash. Not just Lance's Dragonite or Leon's Charizard. You showed the entire world that every Pokémon has a soul as complex and deep as our own. That's a truth that can't be unlearned. That will be your real victory, long after people forget the score." He looked at her, at the earnest belief in her eyes, and felt a profound sense of gratitude that went beyond their alliance. In this whirlwind of chaos and fear, she had become his anchor. She was the one person who could meet his impossible reality with intellect, courage, and an unwavering faith in him. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," he said, the words simple but heavy with meaning. "You would have found a way," she replied, a faint blush on her cheeks. "You always do." Before he could respond, a shrill alarm blared through the command center, a jarring shriek that shattered the peaceful atmosphere. Red lights flashed across the walls, and a massive holographic map of the world appeared in the center of the room. A single, pulsing red dot was glowing ominously over the center of the Sinnoh region. "What is it?" Lance demanded, instantly shifting from relaxed elder statesman to battle-hardened commander. Steven was already at a console, his fingers flying across the keys. "I don't know," he said, his voice tight with alarm. "We're picking up a massive, anomalous energy reading. Tectonic sensors are going haywire all over Sinnoh. And, dear Arceus, the energy signature, it's spatial, temporal, and something else. Something I've never seen before. It's tearing a hole in the fabric of reality." Cynthia was already moving toward the map, her face pale. "The coordinates," she said, her voice a tense whisper. "That's not just Sinnoh. That's the absolute peak of Mount Coronet." Ash felt it before she finished her sentence. A psychic scream that ripped through the calm hum of the world like a blade. It was an agony that dwarfed what he had felt from Lugia and Kyogre. It was the sound of a being whose very essence was being rewritten, its fundamental nature violated and inverted. And woven through the pain was the cold, static-filled anti-voice of the entity. The Sylphium. Less than balance is a flaw. Chaos will be ordered. The Guardian will become the gate, greater than. Spear Pillar. Cynthia breathed, her eyes wide with horror. It's Spear Pillar. Ash clutched his head, the alien voice a drill in his skull. It's got one of them, he gasped, stumbling back. A legendary. It's twisting it, corrupting it. He looked at Cynthia, his eyes pleading for her to understand. It's the Guardian, the one from the distortion world. Giratina, she whispered, the name hanging in the air like a death sentence. Deep within a hidden, mobile fortress orbiting high above the Earth, Director Valerius watched the same data stream on his own holographic map. He stood in a pristine, white laboratory, a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding on the screen. In the center of the lab, a massive, spherical containment field flickered, now empty. Just an hour ago, the black crystal shard had been inside it. Report. He snapped at a terrified scientist who was cowering behind a console. Sir, it's impossible. The scientist stammered, his face ashen. The shard, it didn't just break containment. It began to resonate with its own internal energy source. It folded space. It created a stable, microscopic wormhole right here in the lab. It wasn't a beacon, Director, it was a seed. It just hatched. Valerius stared at the data. The energy that had bloomed from the shard had not dissipated. It had lanced out across the globe, a targeted, faster-than-light burst of information and energy aimed directly at the one place on the planet where the veil between dimensions was at its thinnest. Spear Pillar. He had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He had brought the detonator into his own house, believing it was the bomb itself. He thought he was studying a power source. Instead, he had been incubating a virus and had just personally delivered it to its most vulnerable and valuable target. It used our own network to pinpoint the weakest dimensional barrier, Valerius murmured, a sliver of cold, terrifying understanding dawning in his eyes. He had been outmaneuvered, his own logic and technology turned against him by a force he couldn't comprehend. For the first time in his life, Director Valerius felt a tremor of genuine fear. The flight to Sinnoh was a desperate, high-speed race against an unseen clock. Lance had procured a specialized, high-altitude stealth jet, a machine that could outrun a Pidgeot and fly high enough to be invisible to conventional radar. Ash, Cynthia, and Lance were the spearhead, the only ones who could hope to face what was waiting for them. The other champions were mobilizing, preparing to deal with the global chaos that was sure to follow. As they streaked across the sky, Ash kept his senses extended. The psychic scream from Spear Pillar was a constant, agonizing throb, but beneath it, the entire region of Sinnoh was beginning to panic. He could feel the wild Pokémon of Mount Coronet in a state of primal terror, fleeing the mountain in droves. The mountain itself felt sick, its ancient, stony consciousness groaning under a pressure that was not of this world. It's poisoning the whole mountain, Ash said, his hands pressed against the jet's window, looking down at the dark, sprawling landmass below. This is worse than with Kyogre. It's not just controlling Giratina. It's using it as an antenna to broadcast its wrongness. Spear Pillar is a temple, Cynthia explained, her voice tight as she studied a topographical map of the area. It was built at a confluence of dimensional energies. It is the lock on the door to the distortion world. If that lock is broken, the very laws of physics could begin to unravel. Then we can't let them break it, Lance said, his face set like granite. He was already in his battle attire, his cape secured, his eyes burning with the fire of 1,000 battles. Whatever is up there, we face it. We hold the line. That is our duty. The jet couldn't take them all the way. The atmospheric distortions around the peak were too violent. They set down in a clearing miles from the summit and began the final ascent on their flying Pokémon. Lance on his Dragonite, Cynthia on her Garchomp, and Ash on Charizard. The higher they climbed, the more twisted reality became. The air grew cold, but it was a dead, unnatural cold that had nothing to do with altitude. The sky, instead of turning a dark, clear blue, was a bruised purple-gray, shot through with veins of sickly green light. Space itself seemed to warp and fold, with trees and rocks momentarily appearing stretched or compressed. When they finally broke through the cloud cover and reached the summit, the sight that greeted them was a scene from a nightmare. Spear Pillar was a ruin. The ancient stone columns that had stood for millennia were cracked and crumbling. The air was thick with a black, static-like energy that crackled and hissed. But the most terrifying sight was the sky above the broken dais. It had been torn open. A swirling, chaotic vortex of impossible geometry hung in the air, the distortion world, bleeding into their own. And from the center of that vortex, a creature of shadow and fury descended. It was Giratina, but it was a perversion of its true form. Its magnificent, ghostly wings were tattered, and its body was covered in pulsating, black crystalline growths that seemed to have burst from within its skin. Its golden half-rings were cracked, leaking the same black static as the air around them. And its eyes held no intelligence, no balance, no will of their own. They were twin pools of cold, red light, glowing with the dispassionate malice of the Sylphium. It opened its mouth, but the sound that emerged was not the cry of a Pokémon. It was a chorus of voices, a broadcast of pure, cold logic that grated on the soul. Less than the error will be corrected. This world's unbalanced equation of chaos will be solved. The barriers will fall. Order will be imposed. Greater than asterisk. That's not Giratina talking, Ash gritted out, the voice of physical pain in his mind. That's the thing that's controlling it. Then we fight, Lance roared, wasting no time on words. Dragonite, Dragon Rush. The loyal dragon cloaked itself in blue energy and shot toward the corrupted legendary like a missile. Giratina watched it approach, its head cocked with an unnatural, bird-like motion. It didn't try to dodge. Instead, it simply phased, its body becoming momentarily intangible. Dragonite's attack passed harmlessly through it. As Dragonite shot past, Giratina solidified and whipped its tail, a Shadow Force-empowered strike that sent Lance's Pokémon crashing into one of the ancient pillars, shattering it. Garchomp, Stone Edge. Cynthia commanded. Garchomp slammed its claws into the ground, and pillars of sharp, glowing rock erupted, racing toward Giratina. But reality itself was now Giratina's weapon. It distorted the space in front of it, and the stone pillars curved in midair, missing it completely and crashing into each other. This wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. They were trying to fight a hurricane with their fists. Giratina wasn't just a powerful Pokémon. It was a localized law of physics, and the Sylphium was a master at exploiting it. It's no good, Ash yelled, his Charizard weaving through a volley of aura spheres that the corrupted Giratina fired. We can't hit it. It controls the space around it. We're not fighting the Pokémon, we're fighting the battlefield itself. He could feel it now, the tactical mind of the Sylphium, cold and brilliant, using Giratina's abilities with a ruthless efficiency that the Pokémon itself would never have employed. It wasn't just attacking, it was systematically dismantling the spear pillar, striking at the key structural points, trying to bring the whole temple down and permanently shatter the dimensional lock. Ash's mind raced. He felt the pure, unadulterated power being channeled through Giratina. He felt the cold, commanding consciousness of the Sylphium. But beneath it all, buried deep, deep within the cage of its own body, he felt a faint, flickering ember of another consciousness. A prisoner. The real Giratina. It was weak, terrified, and fighting a hopeless battle from the inside. There was only one way. He couldn't win here. He had to take the fight to the enemy's home turf. Cynthia. Lance. You have to keep it busy, Ash shouted, his decision made. I'm going in. Going in where? Lance yelled back, his Dragonite now struggling back into the air. Into the distortion world. The real battle isn't here, it's in its mind. I have to break the Sylphium's hold. Ash, no, Cynthia cried, her face a mask of terror. You don't know what's in there, if that thing gets a hold of you. It's the only chance we've got. He yelled back, his expression a mixture of fear and absolute resolve. Charizard, get me to that portal. Charizard roared its ascent and banked hard, flying straight for the swirling, chaotic vortex in the sky. The corrupted Giratina sensed his intent and turned its full attention on him, unleashing a torrent of shadow energy. We will not let you pass, Lance roared, a declaration to the heavens. He and Cynthia moved to intercept, their own Pokémon putting themselves directly in the line of fire, buying Ash the precious seconds he needed. A brilliant, desperate battle raged below as Garchomp and Dragonite engaged the corrupted godhead on, their devotion to their trainers a fiery defiance against the cold logic of the Sylphium. Ash and Charizard plunged into the portal. The transition was violent and disorienting. The laws of physics dissolved. Up became down, colors bled into sounds, and for a heart-stopping moment, Ash felt his own consciousness start to unravel, to be broken down into its constituent, meaningless parts. He clung to Charizard's back, focusing on the solid, familiar warmth of his partner, the unwavering loyalty he felt in its mind. It was his anchor in a sea of non-reality. They emerged into a world of impossible vistas. They were floating in a void of shifting, crystalline platforms and inverted waterfalls that flowed into misty, unseen skies. This was the distortion world, Giratina's home, but it was sick. The normally mesmerizing, chaotic beauty was marred by the Sylphium's presence. Great, black crystalline growths, like the ones on Giratina's body, pulsed on the floating islands, spreading like a cancer, imposing a rigid, grid-like order on the beautiful chaos. And in the center of it all, Ash saw it. The core of the infection. A massive, black, crystalline lattice, a web of cold, dead logic. And trapped within it, like a fly in a spider's web, was a shimmering, ethereal image of Giratina's true, uncorrupted form. It was struggling feebly against its prison. This was the Pokémon's soul. The Sylphium's voice echoed from the lattice, no longer needing a vessel, speaking with its own, true voice. Less than you are an error. A statistical anomaly of sentience in a universe of ordered law. Your presence here is not logical. You will be corrected. Greater than asterisk. I've heard that one before, Ash growled, sliding off Charizard's back onto a floating platform. Pikachu was a tense ball of energy on his shoulder. I'm getting real tired of your logic. The world around him shifted. The crystalline platforms vanished, replaced by an image, a vision projected directly into his mind. He was standing in a world of perfect, gray stillness. The ground was smooth and featureless. The sky was a uniform, blank white. There were no trees, no Pokémon, no people. No life. No chaos. Just a profound, silent, perfect order. Less than behold. Perfection. A universe without error. No pain. No fear. No choice. No chaos. This is the final solution. The end state of all things. Greater than asterisk. The vision was seductive in its stark simplicity. It promised an end to all suffering, all conflict. It was a promise of peace. A dead peace. It's empty, Ash said, his voice flat. Less than it is pure. Greater than asterisk. It's pointless, Ash shot back, the vision beginning to waver as his own conviction pushed back against it. You say emotion is a flaw. That choice is chaos. But you're wrong. That's not the flaw. That's the point. The pain of losing makes the joy of winning real. The fear of falling is what makes the courage to fly mean something. The struggle, the mess, the chaos, that's what gives it all meaning. He clenched his fists, pouring his own memories, his own feelings, his own life into the mental space, fighting the Sylphium's vision with his own reality. He showed it the bitter tears of his loss to Richie in the Indigo League, and the blazing triumph of his victory in Alola. He showed it the terror of facing a rampaging Gyarados, and the quiet friendship of a lonely Cubone. His reality was stronger. The gray, perfect world shattered, and he was back in the distortion world. The Sylphium's voice hissed, a sound of frustration, of a machine encountering a variable it cannot compute. Less than your logic is flawed. Greater than asterisk. Maybe, Ash said, a grin touching his lips. But it's my logic. He turned his attention to the trapped soul of Giratina. He couldn't break the crystal cage with force. It was made of pure ideology, so he had to fight it with its opposite. He reached out, not with his hands, but with his mind. Pikachu's cheeks sparked, its energy acting as an amplifier for Ash's projection. He didn't send an attack. He sent a feeling. He sent it to Giratina. Guardian of balance, he thought, his mental voice a clear, strong bell in the chaotic dimension. I know you're in there. I know you can hear me. You are not a gate. You are a guardian. You don't serve order. You serve balance. And balance requires chaos just as much as it requires order. Remember who you are. He pushed a memory into the crystal lattice. His memory of their first meeting, of Giratina's fierce, protective spirit, its sense of duty. The Sylphium's cage was designed to hold back a prisoner. It wasn't designed to withstand a key opening the lock from the outside. A tremor ran through the black crystal. A faint, golden light began to glow from within the trapped soul of Giratina. It was fighting back, remembering itself. The Sylphium redoubled its efforts, the black lattice pulsing with energy, trying to crush the spark of rebellion. But it was too late. Ash had given Giratina an anchor. Now, Ash roared, both aloud and in his mind, "Take your home back." With a psychic scream that was a perfect fusion of rage and liberation, Giratina's soul erupted in a blaze of golden light. The black crystalline cage shattered, dissolving into harmless static. Freed, Giratina's spirit roared and shot back toward the portal to the physical world. Ash felt a violent lurch as the Sylphium's influence was ripped away. He stumbled, falling to his knees, the psychic backlash leaving him dizzy and nauseous. The battle was won. Back on Spear Pillar, the corrupted Giratina froze. It let out a terrible, screeching roar as a brilliant golden light erupted from its chest, vaporizing the black crystalline growths. Its body convulsed, and the cold, red light in its eyes was extinguished, replaced by its own, fiercely intelligent gaze. Giratina was free. With a roar of pure fury, it turned its power on the vortex, not to widen it, but to seal it. The rift began to close. Ash and Charizard shot out of the portal just before it snapped shut, leaving behind a sky that was bruised and broken, but whole once more. The Sylphium was gone, its connection severed. Giratina, exhausted but free, gave Lance and Cynthia a nod of profound, ancient respect. Then it locked eyes with Ash. It sent him a feeling of shared victory and a grim warning, a flash of a million other black shards, adrift in the void between worlds, waiting. This was just one. Then, its duty done, it faded, returning to its own world to heal and to stand guard. Ash landed heavily on the broken stone of Spear Pillar, his strength failing him. The adrenaline faded, leaving an ache that was bone deep and soul weary. They had survived. They had pushed back the darkness. But he now knew, with terrifying certainty, that this was only the beginning. The Sylphium hadn't just attacked. It had announced itself. And it had an army. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8, The Reluctant Alliance. The world was holding a collective breath, and Ash could hear its shuddering terror. The aftermath of the Spear Pillar battle was not a quiet victory. It was a global, psychic shockwave. The brief, violent tear in the sky over Sinnoh had been visible from space, a planetary scar that had set every sensor and satellite screaming. News channels broadcast panicked, looping footage of the impossible vortex, while scientists offered frantic, inadequate explanations involving solar flares and atmospheric plasma. But the people knew. They had felt it. A cold dread that had settled in the deepest parts of their collective unconscious. In the command center at the Indigo Plateau, the atmosphere was thick with the grim reality of their situation. The brief euphoria of the Winden victory was a distant, bitter memory. They had won a battle of perception, only to be immediately thrown into a war for existence. Holographic screens showed the data streams, seismic activity stabilizing, dimensional radiation dissipating, but the fear was still rising. "We were fools," Lance said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. He stood before the main map, his arms crossed, his cape seeming to absorb the light in the room. "We celebrated a stadium victory while our real enemy was sharpening its blade. We fought Valerius, and in doing so, we ignored the monster at his back." "We did not ignore it," Steven countered, his tone precise, analytical, but edged with exhaustion. "We simply did not comprehend its scale. How could we? We are Pokémon trainers, not theoretical physicists. What we faced at Spear Pillar was not a creature of this world. It does not follow our rules." He gestured to a screen displaying a complex energy waveform. "This is the residual signature of the Sylphium's presence. It's not biological. It's not psychic in any way we understand. It's mathematical. It's a living equation that cancels out reality." Ash was sitting at the table, his head in his hands, trying to filter out the cacophony of global anxiety. He could feel the raw fear of millions of people, a tidal wave of emotion that threatened to drown him. He focused on the steady, calm presence of Pikachu in his lap, a small, warm anchor in the storm. "So we can't fight it," Leon said, the usual confidence absent from his voice. He was pacing back and forth, unable to stand still. "My Charizard can shatter mountains, but how do you punch an equation? How do you battle a concept?" The question hung in the room, unanswered and unanswerable. They had the strongest Pokémon on the planet at their command. They could level cities, move continents. But they were generals with an army of swords facing an enemy made of poison gas. Their strength was useless. It was Cynthia who finally broke the hopeless silence. She had been standing apart, studying the data streams with a terrifying, cold intensity. No, she said, her voice cutting through the despair. We can't fight it. Not with what we have. She turned to face them, her gray eyes hard as flint. But there is someone who might be able to. Someone who has spent years developing technology specifically designed to interact with and neutralize non-physical threats. A heavy, dawning horror settled over the room as they all realized who she meant. Absolutely not, Lance snapped, his voice booming with outrage. You cannot be suggesting we go crawling back to that monster. Valerius is the reason this happened. His meddling with that shard is what triggered the attack on Giratina. And he is the only one who has any tangible data on the entity, Cynthia shot back, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to Lance's fury. His technology, however abhorrent its application, is decades ahead of anything the Devon Corporation or the Sylph Company possesses. Those dampener weapons he used, they don't just project sound. They project a frequency that disrupts psychic and extra-dimensional energy. He was trying to build a weapon to sever a bond. He may have inadvertently created the only tool in the world that can track or even disrupt the Sylphium. The room devolved into a heated debate. Alder argued that any alliance with a man like Valerius was a betrayal of their principles. Diantha worried that it was a trap, that Valerius would use their desperation to capture Ash. But Stephen, his logical mind processing the grim truth, slowly nodded. She's right, he said quietly. My own labs have analyzed the energy signature. To track it would require a sensor network that doesn't exist. To counter it would require a frequency generator of impossible complexity. Aegis, maybe our only option. All eyes turned to Ash. He was the one Valerius wanted. He was the one who had been hunted, who had felt the cold void of the man's perfect soldiers. He lifted his head, and his friends were struck by the weariness in his eyes, a depth of age that had not been there a month ago. When I was in the distortion world, Ash began, his voice quiet but commanding, the Sylphium showed me something. A vision. Its ideal world. A universe of perfect order, silent and gray. No life. No choice. Just stillness. He looked around the table. That's its goal. It wants to erase everything. Not conquer it. Erase it. It doesn't hate us. It sees us as a math problem with no solution. And it wants to delete the equation. He stood up, his resolve hardening. We can't afford principles right now. We can't afford pride. If Valerius has a weapon that can help us fight the end of the world, we have to get it. Even if it means asking him for it. He looked at Cynthia. You're right. We have to go to him. Contacting Director Valerius was like trying to send a message to a ghost. Aegis had no public presence, no official channels. But Stephen's resources, when fully leveraged, were formidable. A single, encrypted message was bounced through a dozen untraceable servers, containing only a set of coordinates in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and a time. It was a request for a parley, a shot in the dark. For 2 days, there was no reply. Then, a simple, 2-word message came back. You will be met. The meeting place was a desolate stretch of open ocean. Ash and Cynthia flew out on her Garchomp, a tiny speck against an endless blue canvas of sea and sky. There was no land in sight, no other craft. It felt like they were the only 2 people left in the world. This feels like a trap, Ash said, shouting over the rush of the wind. It is, Cynthia shouted back, her hair whipping around her face. The question is what kind of trap it is. Right on time, the air in front of them began to shimmer. Not with the playful distortion of a psychic Pokémon, but with the hard, technological lines of a cloaking field disengaging. A colossal, angular shape resolved out of the empty sky. It was a flying fortress, a machine the size of a city block, held aloft by a series of massive, silent turbines. Its surface was a mosaic of matte black armor plating and sensor arrays. It was the heart of Aegis, a weapon of staggering power and technological supremacy. A boarding ramp lowered from its belly. A silent, helmeted Aegis soldier stood at the top, gesturing for them to land. There was no turning back. They were escorted through sterile, white corridors that hummed with latent power. The air was chilled, filtered, and devoid of any scent. Agents in gray uniforms moved with silent, disciplined purpose, their faces impassive. It was a place without warmth, without life, a perfect reflection of its master's philosophy. They were led to an observation deck, a grand, circular room with a floor-to-ceiling panoramic window that looked down on the curve of the earth. Director Valerius stood in the center of the room, his back to them, his hands clasped behind him. He looked smaller, somehow, without the backdrop of his own propaganda. "I must admit, I am surprised," he said, without turning around. "I did not expect the heroes of the Pokémon League to come seeking an audience with the villain." "We're not here for an audience," Ash said, stepping forward. "We're here because you made a mistake that almost destroyed a region, and we think you're the only one with the tools to help us fix it." Valerius finally turned. His face was drawn, his usual mask of charismatic confidence gone, replaced by a deep, weary tension. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. "The Spear Pillar event," he said, his voice flat. "Yes. A catastrophic miscalculation. My models failed to predict the shard's true nature. It was humbling." "Humbling." Cynthia scoffed, her voice dripping with ice. "You unleashed a cosmic horror on the world, and you call it humbling." "I call it a data point, champion." Valerius snapped, his composure finally cracking, a flash of raw frustration in his eyes. "A terrifying, world-altering data point that proves everything I have ever believed. For years, I have warned that the presence of these gods on our planet is an existential threat. That a single battle between them could shatter our civilization. No one listened. They called me a fearmonger. And now, a being from beyond the stars has come to prove me right, and you come to me for help." He began to pace the room, his movements agitated, his carefully constructed logic fraying at the edges. "I have dedicated my life to one principle, the protection of humanity above all else. I saw you, Ketchum, as the ultimate catalyst for chaos. A boy who could talk to gods, who could draw their attention, who could spark the very conflict that would be our undoing. I believed that containing you was the only logical way to prevent that." "And you were wrong," Ash said simply. "Yes, I was wrong," Valerius roared, spinning to face him. "I was wrong about the nature of the threat. But I was not wrong about the danger. My family, my wife, my daughter, they weren't trainers. They were civilians. They were on vacation in a small coastal town in Johto 10 years ago. A town that had the misfortune of being the battlefield for a territorial dispute between a Lugia and a Shadow Lugia." His voice broke, the memory a raw, open wound. "I watched it on a satellite feed. I was a junior intelligence analyst for the League at the time. I was helpless. I watched as their stray attacks, their godlike indifference to the world beneath them, incinerated a town. An entire town. Gone. For nothing. A squabble. That is the day I created Aegis. To ensure that no human child ever had to be erased as collateral damage in a game played by monsters." He stood there, breathing heavily, his life's motivation, his deepest pain, laid bare in the sterile room. Ash didn't see a villain anymore. He saw a man twisted by grief, so desperate to prevent a tragedy that he was willing to become one himself. Ash felt a stirring beside Valerius. From the shadows of an alcove, a Pokémon emerged. It was an old Nenettles, its once brilliant cream-colored fur now faded, its 9 tails moving slowly, one of its eyes clouded with age. It padded over to Valerius and leaned against his leg, a silent, comforting presence. It was the only living, warm thing in the entire fortress. Ash closed his eyes and reached out, not to Valerius, but to the Nenettles. He didn't pry. He just opened himself to its feelings. And what he felt almost brought him to his knees. He felt a wave of ancient, profound grief that mirrored the man's own. He saw a flash of memory through the Pokémon's eyes, the heat of an unnatural fire, the terrifying shadow of a dark god in the sky, the scent of burning homes. And he felt the overwhelming, desperate sorrow of the man beside it, a young Valerius, kneeling in the ashes, his hand resting on his Nenettles' head, the only other survivor of his family. The Nenettles had been his daughter's Pokémon. Ash opened his eyes, and they were filled not with anger, but with a deep, sorrowful empathy. "I'm sorry," Ash said, his voice thick with an emotion that was not his own. "For what you lost. She has never forgotten. She feels your pain every single day. She stays with you not out of duty, but because she knows she's the only piece of your daughter you have left. She's protecting her memory. For both of you. Valerius froze. He stared at Ash, his face ashen, his defenses utterly shattered. He slowly looked down at the Nenettles, who looked up at him, a soft, sad whine escaping its throat. For the first time, he was seeing not a Pokémon, not a tool, not a living memento, but a fellow survivor, a being that had shared his deepest trauma and carried his grief alongside him for a decade. The truth of Ash's power, of the bond he had sought to quantify and control, hit him with the force of a physical blow. He staggered back and sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. The cold, logical director of Aegis was gone, replaced by a broken man. We both want to protect our home, Ash said gently, stepping closer. We both want to make sure no one else has to feel what you felt that day. But the difference is, my home includes them. He gestured to the Nenettles. It includes all of them. The Sylphium wants to erase them and us. Help me save all of it. Help me save our home. For a long time, the only sound was Valerius's ragged breathing. Cynthia stood in silence, watching, realizing that this was a negotiation that logic and threats could never have won. It could only be won with a bridge of shared pain. Finally, Valerius looked up. The grief was still in his eyes, but beneath it was a flicker of his old, analytical fire, now redirected. His personal war was over. A new one had just begun. The frequency technology, he said, his voice raspy but firm. It can be recalibrated, reversed. Instead of dampening psychic energy, it could be tuned to track the Sylphium's unique dimensional signature. We could create a global sensor network. We could see them coming. He stood up, his transformation from broken man back to commander almost instantaneous. The resources of Aegis are now at your disposal. This is not an alliance of friendship. It is an alliance of necessity. A temporary truce against a common extinction-level threat. He looked at Ash, his gaze now holding not hatred, but a grudging, complex respect. You are not the weapon I thought you were. You are something far more dangerous. You are a truth I was not prepared to face. With that, he turned to his console and began barking orders, his voice once again the cold, efficient instrument of command, but with a new purpose. Ash and Cynthia exchanged a look. They had their reluctant alliance. They had their weapon. And they had a chilling sense that the real war was just about to begin. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Hall of Origin. The truce was a fragile, beautiful, and utterly terrifying thing. In the 2 weeks following the confrontation at Spear Pillar, the world had been transformed. The Aegis flying fortress, once a symbol of shadowy oppression, was now the nerve center of planetary defense. Its sterile white corridors, previously unnerving, now hummed with a desperate, focused energy. Champions and Aegis agents worked side by side in the main command center, a tense but functional alliance born from the crucible of imminent extinction. The animosity was still there, a low-voltage current beneath the surface, but it was dwarfed by the sheer, crushing scale of the threat they faced. Valerius's technology, recalibrated and linked with the global resources of the Devon Corporation, had created the sensor network he'd promised. A holographic map of the Earth floated in the center of the room, no longer a tactical display for hunting a single human, but a planetary cardiogram, monitoring the faint, irregular heartbeat of the Sylphium's incursions. They had tracked and neutralized a dozen minor breaches, small pockets of dimensional instability where the black, crystalline energy attempted to seep into their world. Ash, acting as a psychic early warning system, would feel the wrongness moments before the sensors flared to life, and one of the champions, guided by Aegis telemetry, would lead a strike team to seal the wound. They were winning the small battles, holding the line, but Ash could feel it, a deep, rising tension in the fabric of the universe. The Sylphium was not launching skirmishes. It was probing. It was gathering data. It was preparing for something final. He spent his days in a state of deep meditation, his consciousness extended, listening not to the Pokémon of the world, but to the silence between worlds, trying to anticipate the enemy's next move. The warning, when it came, was not a single alarm, but a global scream. Every sensor in the network flared red at once. Report. Valerius snapped, his voice cutting through the sudden, panicked clamor of the command center. Sir, I don't know what I'm seeing, a stunned Aegis technician replied, his hands shaking over his console. It's not a breach. It's a convergence. We're tracking dozens, no, hundreds, of Silphium energy signatures. They're not entering our dimension. They're moving outside of it, through a higher order space, all aimed at a single, theoretical coordinate. Stephen Stone was already cross-referencing the coordinate with his own databases, his face growing paler with every passing second. That's not possible, he whispered, looking up from his slate, his eyes wide with disbelief. That coordinate, it doesn't exist. It's not on any star chart. It's not in any known dimension. According to our models, it's a point of absolute origin. A place outside of space-time. Cynthia, who had been studying ancient texts recovered from the Celestic ruins, looked up, a terrible, dawning comprehension on her face. She walked over to the holographic map and pointed at the impossible, flashing red dot in the void. There is one map that shows that place, she said, her voice barely audible over the hum of the machines. It's not a map of space. It's a map of belief. The ancient Sinnoh-myths call it the unplace. The chamber where the original one first dreamt the universe into being. Her words landed like stones in the silent room. The Hall of Origin. As if summoned by the name, Ash cried out, staggering back from his meditative state, his hands flying to his head. He wasn't hearing a Pokemon's pain. He was hearing the pain of reality itself. A faint, desperate, fundamental cry from the very laws of physics, the sound of a system under attack from outside the system. It's going after Arceus, Ash gasped, his eyes wide with a terror that dwarfed everything he had faced before. It's not trying to break the world anymore. It's going to the source. It's going to hit the reset button. The Silphium's endgame was finally clear, and its sheer, blasphemous arrogance was breathtaking. It wasn't trying to conquer them. It was trying to edit them out of existence. To go to the author of reality and force a rewrite, turning the entire cosmos into its preferred state of gray, silent, logical perfection. The stakes had been raised from planetary survival to the preservation of all that had ever been or ever would be. How do we get there? Leon demanded, his voice a low growl, his hand already on his Charizard's Pokeball. Where is the door to this hall? There is no door, Stephen said grimly. It's not a place you can travel to. It's the axis upon which all of reality spins. The Silphium found a way, Ash countered, his breathing ragged as he fought to master the psychic static flooding his mind. It's using its own energy to tear a path, a tunnel through the space between spaces. The convergence point, that's where the tunnel opens. That's our way in. Valerius was already at the main console, his fingers a blur. The physical point of entry is materializing now. High altitude. Over the ruins of the Tani Palace in the Mycena mountain range. It was an ancient temple dedicated to Arceus. Of course. His voice was cold, efficient, the commander reasserting himself in the face of impossible odds. The Aegis fleet will mobilize immediately. We will hold the entrance on this side. We will engage any and all hostile entities that emerge. He turned, his gaze locking with Ash's, the reluctant alliance now forged into a single, desperate purpose. Your team will be the spearhead. Go to the source. End this. We will buy you the time. There were no further words. No grand speeches. Every person in the room knew their role. This was the final battle, the last stand not for a region or a world, but for reality itself. The sky above the Mycena ruins was bleeding. A great, jagged tear of black, static-filled energy hung in the air, a wound in the world that pulsed with an unholy light. The ancient, crumbling palace below, a place of forgotten reverence, was now the staging ground for the final war. The Aegis fleet, a phalanx of flying fortresses and sleek, black interceptors, formed a defensive perimeter around the breach. Below them, on the ground, stood the champions of the world, a small, defiant gathering of humanity's greatest strength. Ash stood at their head, his face grim, his entire being focused on the screaming vortex above. He could feel the Silphium's cold, triumphant consciousness on the other side, waiting. It's stable, Ash said, his voice broadcast to the fleet and the champions through his comms. The path is open. It's now or never. We'll hold the line, Lance's voice came back, resolute. For as long as it takes. Go, Ash. With a shared, unspoken command, the champions released their Pokémon. Dragonite, Garchomp, Metagross, Gardevoir, and two mighty Charizard took to the air, forming a V formation, an honor guard for the fate of their world. Ash, on his own Charizard, took the point. Together, they surged upward, a constellation of heroes plunging into the heart of the abyss. They passed through the veil, and the world dissolved. They were in a corridor of pure, unformed potential, a place of churning, raw creation that the Sylphium was forcing into a stable tunnel. Streaks of light like newborn galaxies shot past them, and clouds of dark matter roiled in the distance. And then the enemy appeared. They did not fly or teleport. They simply coalesced. From the chaotic energy of the corridor, two immense forms took shape. One was a creature of molten, black rock and glowing, internal anti-light, a mockery of the continent creator, its body radiating a cold that froze the very potential of the space around it. The other was a serpentine being of pure, silent vacuum, its movements sucking the light from the corridor, its form a twisting ribbon of absolute nothingness. A dark Groudon and a shadow Rayquaza. Echoes. Cynthia breathed over the comms, her voice tight with awe and horror. It's creating them from its own logic. Perversions of the legends it has observed. Then we will give them a new lesson to observe. Leon roared, his competitive fire igniting even in the face of Armageddon. Champions. Engage. The battle that erupted was one of mythic proportions. Leon's and Lance's Charizard and Dragonite peeled off, a trinity of fire and dragon fury, to engage the Shadow Rayquaza in a dizzying, three-dimensional dogfight through the chaos of non-space. Cynthia's Garchomp and Steven's Metagross Dove, a storm of steel and dragon claws, to meet the dark Groudon head-on, their battle shaking the very foundations of the conceptual tunnel. The other champions and their Pokémon formed a defensive screen, holding back smaller, shard-like echoes that began to form in their wake. The path ahead of Ash was clear. Don't stop, he yelled to his own team. They're buying us an opening. We have to push through. Pikachu was on his shoulder, a brilliant beacon of golden light. Greninja and Sceptile had been released, leaping from floating motes of reality to the next, their bodies blurs of motion as they cut down the smaller shards that broke through the champion's line. This was their singular purpose: to get Ash to the end of the tunnel. As they flew, the Sylphium's true assault began. It wasn't physical. It was a direct, overwhelming psychic attack on Ash himself. Less than your struggle is a flaw in the code. Your defiance is an unrounded decimal. You are the imbalance. Give up. Accept the calculation. Surrender to the final, perfect zero. Greater than. The voice was a billion razor blades scraping against his soul. It showed him visions of his own failure. He saw his friends falling, his Pokémon defeated, his world dissolving into gray, silent dust. It showed him Cynthia, her face turning to ash, her last look one of disappointment in him. It was an attack of pure, weaponized despair. He cried out, his grip on Charizard faltering. The visions were so real, so logical. The odds were impossible. His struggle was illogical. Ash, don't listen. It was Pikachu's voice, a single, pure note of unwavering belief that cut through the cacophony of lies. He felt the small paw on his cheek, a physical anchor in the mental storm. He felt Charizard's fierce, protective loyalty through the scales beneath him. He felt the silent, deadly focus of Greninja and Sceptile, their trust in him absolute. His bond. The illogical, chaotic, beautiful bond with his family. It was the one variable the Sylphium could not calculate. Never. Ash roared back into the void, his own voice now a weapon. I am not an error. I am the reason the equation exists. He pushed back with his own will, his spirit a blazing sun against the cold darkness. The psychic assault faltered, the visions shattering like glass. He could see his destination now. A brilliant, golden gateway at the end of the tunnel, shimmering with a light that was both ancient and new. The entrance to the Hall of Origin. But the Sylphium had one final guardian. As the champions battled, the great echoes and Valerius's fleet fought a desperate holding action against the swarms of shards pouring into their world, a final form coalesced before the Golden Gate. It was humanoid, tall and slender, its body seemingly woven from shadow and starlight, a whole in reality in the shape of a being. It held a long, crystalline spear that pulsed with black light. It was a dark reflection of Arceus's own chosen hero from the myths. A dark knight to guard a dark god. I've got this, Ash said, his voice grim. Go. Get to the gate. He mentally commanded his Pokémon. Charizard Dove, dropping Ash onto a stable, floating platform before the Dark Sentinel. Pikachu leapt to his side. Greninja and Sceptile landed in battle stances, flanking him. The Dark Knight raised its spear. The battle for the gate had begun. It was a whirlwind of motion and energy. The entity was impossibly fast, its spear a blur of black energy that deflected water shuriken and leaf blades with contemptuous ease. It fought with a cold, perfect precision that had no wasted movements, no emotion, only a perfect execution of combat logic. But Ash was not fighting with logic. He was fighting with a symphony. Pikachu, left, Iron Tail on the spear to create an opening. Sceptile, use its recovery frames to bind its legs with Frenzy Plant. Greninja, when it's bound, full power water shuriken to the chest. Charizard, from above, Dragon Claw, now. His commands weren't spoken. They were a single, instantaneous wave of coordinated intent. It was a level of teamwork that went beyond training, beyond instinct. It was 4 bodies and 1 will, moving as a perfect, harmonious unit. The Dark Knight, for all its perfect logic, could not counter a strategy that was being executed by 4 different combatants simultaneously. Pikachu's tail struck the spear, the clang echoing in the silent space. The Frenzy Plant erupted, thorny vines snaking around the knight's legs. The water shuriken, now a massive, spinning disk of energy, slammed into its chest, causing it to stagger back. And from above, Charizard descended like a meteor, its claws glowing with draconic power, and shattered the Dark Sentinel into a million motes of fading light. The path was clear. Ash, bruised and breathing heavily, recalled his team, all of them battered but victorious. He gave Pikachu a grateful nod and ran, sprinting the final 100 yards toward the golden light. He passed through the gateway and stumbled into a vast, silent space. He was standing on a floor of shimmering, ethereal crystal, under a ceiling that contained the whole of the night sky, every star and nebula that had ever been. At the far end of the hall was a great, throne-like dais. But the throne was empty. To the side of it, a terrible sight held him frozen. Arceus, the alpha Pokémon, the original one, was trapped. A cage of the same black, crystalline energy he had seen in the distortion world pulsed around its divine form, but this was infinitely more powerful. The plates that ringed its body were dim, flickering like dying stars. It was being held in stasis, its connection to the universe it had created being systematically severed. And standing before the cage, its back to Ash, was a being of pure, impossible blackness. It had no form, no shape, only an outline against the brilliant light of the cosmos, a being of absolute nothing that was so dense it seemed to suck the very concept of existence into it. It was the source, the core consciousness of the Sylphium. It turned, and Ash felt its gaze not with his eyes, but with his soul. It had no face, but he saw an expression of cold, final triumph. Less than the error is found. Greater than asterisk the voice was no longer a shout, but a calm, factual statement. Less than the deletion is imminent. Greater than. Ash stood alone, at the heart of creation, facing a god of nothing. His friends were miles behind him, fighting for their lives. The creator of all things was a prisoner, fading from its own reality. The Sylphium had won. Chapter 9 end. Chapter 10. The Master's Voice. The silence in the Hall of Origin was a living thing, a pressure that was older than sound. Ash stood on the crystalline floor, a lone, mortal figure in a chamber of gods, bathed in the light of a captive universe. Before him, the Sylphium, a perfect void in the shape of a being, radiated a cold that was not a temperature, but an absence. An absence of heat, of life, of hope. Behind it, Arceus, the Alpha, flickered within its black cage, its divine light guttering like the last candle in a hurricane. Less than the anomaly is isolated. The point of origin is secured. The corrupted variable will be erased from the source code. The universe will be debugged. Greater than asterisk. The Sylphium's voice was no longer a psychic assault. It was a calm, dispassionate eulogy for reality itself. It had won. Logic had prevailed. The chaos of life was a flaw, and it had reached the master console to delete the program. Ash's legs trembled. The sheer, crushing, cosmic hopelessness of the situation washed over him. His friends were fighting and dying in a tunnel miles behind him, buying him time he couldn't use. His strength was spent. His Pokémon were battered. He was a boy with a red hat standing in the path of a god of absolute zero. Every instinct screamed at him to fight, to summon his last ounce of strength, to have Pikachu launch a final, defiant thunderbolt. But he knew it would be useless. Like throwing a rock at a concept. Like trying to punch a mathematical certainty. The Sylphium raised a hand, a gesture of formless shadow, and a spike of black crystal began to form, aimed at the heart of Arceus's prison. The final, killing blow. It was in that moment of absolute despair that Ash felt a familiar warmth against his leg. Pikachu. It wasn't looking at the Sylphium. It was looking up at him. Its small black eyes were not filled with terror, but with a simple, unwavering, and utterly illogical faith. It had stood with him in 1,000 battles, faced down gods and monsters, and its belief in him had never once wavered. It was a belief that defied all logic. And in that instant, Ash understood. He could not fight a concept with force. He could not out-logic a being of pure logic. The Sylphium's entire argument was that chaos, emotion, and choice were errors. He had spent his entire journey trying to prove it wrong. Now, he realized he didn't have to prove it. He just had to show it the data. He stopped fighting. He dropped his hands to his sides. He closed his eyes. He let the fear, the exhaustion, the desperation wash through him and then, past him. He shut down every defensive instinct, every psychic shield, every ounce of aura he had been using to protect himself. He made himself completely, terrifyingly vulnerable. He took a deep breath and opened his mind, not to project, but to receive. And then, he did the most illogical thing of all. He took a step forward, and he opened his heart. Less than irrelevant gesture. The calculation is complete. Greater than asterisk. You've only seen the problem, Ash said, his voice quiet but clear in the vast hall. You've never seen the work. Let me show you. He didn't send a wave of power. He sent a single, simple memory. A stormy night in a forest. A small, defiant Pikachu, refusing to get inside a Pokeball. A flock of angry Spearow, a desperate flight, a stolen bike. Ash, battered and bleeding, standing between the flock and his injured, newfound partner. Spearow, do you know who I am? I'm Ash, from the town of Pallet. I'm destined to be the world's #1 Pokémon master. I can't be defeated by the likes of you. I'm going to capture and defeat you all. You hear me? And then, a desperate plea to the small mouse. Pikachu, get inside the ball, it's the only way. The thunderbolt that had sealed their bond forever. Not a bond of master and servant, but of two souls who had chosen to stand together against the storm. The Sylphium paused, its final attack hesitating for a nanosecond. Less than primitive survival instinct. Sacrifice for genetic continuity. Logical, but inefficient. Greater than asterisk. Ash sent another. A kitchen, filled with the smell of cooking. His mother, Delia, placing a plate of food in front of him, her smile warm and unwavering. The quiet, unconditional love of home. The pride in her eyes when he won, the comfort in her voice when he lost. No logic. No reason. Just love. A constant, foundational truth in a world of variables. Less than emotional attachment. A flaw in parental programming. Creates unnecessary risk. Greater than asterisk. The entity's dismissal was clinical. But Ash could feel a flicker of something else. A microscopic tremor of confusion. This data did not compute. He pressed on, the floodgates now open. He sent it the sting of rivalry. Gary Oak, his arrogant smirk, the half of a Pokeball they both carried. A lifetime of being one step behind, a constant, irritating friction that had pushed him, honed him, forced him to be better. The final, grudging handshake at the Silver Conference. Conflict that did not end in destruction, but in growth. He sent it the pain of goodbye. A Butterfree, his first capture, released to be with its mate, a selfless act that had torn a hole in his young heart. Gudra, left to protect its swampy home. Greninja, a bond so deep it was a physical transformation, left behind to protect a world. Each goodbye was a scar, a wound of illogical love that had made him stronger. Less than data contradicts. Loss is a negative outcome. Strength cannot be derived from weakness. Chaos does not create order. Greater than asterisk. The Sylphium's voice had a hitch in it now, a flicker of static in its perfect logic. The black spear aimed at Arceus wavered. Ash poured it all in, a torrent of life, a hurricane of beautiful, messy chaos. He showed it Misty's furious temper and unwavering loyalty. Brock's failed romances and steadfast friendship. May's journey from uncertainty to confidence. Dawn's crippling self-doubt and blazing contest victories. He showed it laughter around a campfire, arguments over a map, the quiet moments of shared understanding under a canopy of stars. He showed it 1,000 battles, 1,000 defeats, 1,000 victories. And then he showed it Paul. The cold dismissal. The relentless pursuit of power. A philosophy that mirrored the Sylphium's own, that emotion was a weakness, that only pure strength mattered. And he showed it their final battle, the moment Paul had understood that the bond Ash had was not a liability, but a power he could never achieve. The moment a logical man had been defeated by an illogical truth. Less than paradox. Greater than asterisk, the Sylphium shrieked, the sound a grinding of gears in the engine of reality. The hull trembled. Less than the model is flawed. Strength from conflict. Growth from failure. It is not logical. It is not pure. Greater than asterisk. It was never about being pure, Ash said, his voice rising, gaining a strange, resonant power. It was always about being real. He showed it Cynthia. The meeting of equals. Her brilliant mind, her fierce heart. Their flight through the tunnels of Sinnoh. The terror in her eyes when he had leapt from Skarmory to save Kyogre. The quiet respect and the unspoken connection that had grown between them in the command center. A bond not of a child's adventure, but of two adults facing the end of the world together. A promise of a future, the most chaotic and illogical variable of all. The Sylphium recoiled as if struck. The formless shape began to distort, to fray at the edges. Its perfect, cold logic was cracking, shattering against the beautiful, irrational truth of a single human life. Ash knew it was time. He opened his mouth to deliver the final argument, the thesis statement of his entire existence. But the voice that came out was not his alone. It was a chorus. He felt the fierce pride of Charizard, the silent loyalty of Greninja, the wild spirit of Sceptile. He felt the voices of every Pokémon he had ever traveled with, every friend he had ever made. Pidgeot, Bulbasaur, Squirtle, Totodile, Bayleaf, hundreds of them, thousands of them. He felt the gratitude of Lugia from the deep ocean, the fierce balance of Giratina from its restored dimension, the solemn respect of the Titans of Hoenn. He felt the whispers of every wild Pokémon he had ever helped, every soul he had ever touched with his strange and wonderful power. They all rose up within him, a billion threads of light converging on this single point in space-time. Their voices joined his, a single, magnificent chord that was the sound of life itself. You see a universe full of errors, flaws, and chaos, the Master's voice rang out, shaking the Hall of Origin to its foundations, the sound echoing in every corner of the cosmos. You see it all as a problem to be solved. A calculation to be finished. But you're wrong. The black cage around Arceus began to crack, a brilliant golden light shining through. The alpha Pokémon was stirring, its power returning as its jailer's logic failed. The struggle is what makes us strong. The pain is what makes us appreciate joy. The losses are what make the victories count. You see an error in the code, Ash declared, his voice, their voice, reaching its crescendo. I see the whole point. The error is the meaning. With a final, deafening scream of pure, logical paradox, the Sylphium's form imploded. It did not explode in a shower of light or energy. It simply broke. Its core axiom had been proven false by an irrefutable mountain of evidence, and its entire being, which was nothing but that axiom, ceased to be. The black, formless shape dissolved, not into nothing, but into a fine, shimmering dust of pure, dispassionate data, the concept of order, now stripped of its malicious, cancerous ideology. The cage around Arceus shattered. The original one rose to its full, magnificent height, its 1,000 arms of light blazing, the plates around its body shining with the power of renewed creation. The universe was its own again. It turned its infinite gaze upon the dust that had been the Sylphium. With a gesture of divine will, the shimmering data flowed toward it, not as a poison to be purged, but as a missing piece to be reclaimed. It was absorbed back into Arceus's being, the cold, hard logic of order finding its proper place as a counterweight to the beautiful, boundless chaos of creation. The universe was not just restored, it was made more complete. The equation was finally balanced. A wave of pure, silent thought washed over Ash, a feeling of gratitude so immense it was humbling. It was the voice of Arceus, a communication beyond words. Less than you are the bridge, greater than asterisk asterisk it stated, a fact now written into the laws of reality. Less than not a warrior. Not a king. You are the one who proves the paradox is not a flaw, but the design. You are the master, not because you command, but because you understand. Greater than asterisk. With that, the Hall of Origin began to fade, the brilliant light of the cosmos gently receding as reality reasserted itself. In the tunnel, the battle stopped. One moment, the champions were locked in a desperate, losing fight against an endless tide of echoes. The next, the dark Groudon, the shadow Rayquaza, and every single shard of black crystal dissolved into harmless motes of light, their power source instantly cut off. The screaming tear in the sky over Mycena sealed itself, leaving behind a sky that was eerily calm and startlingly blue. It was over. On the Aegis command bridge, every red light on the board blinked green at once. A stunned silence fell over the technicians and agents. Director Valerius stood before the main screen, which now showed only clear, peaceful skies. He looked at his Nenettles, who had been sitting at his feet through the entire ordeal. The old Pokémon looked up and gave a soft, happy yip. Valerius slowly, hesitantly, reached down and rested a hand on its head, a silent acknowledgement of a truth he was only just beginning to accept. Epilogue. Weeks later, the world was healing. The Mycena event was a mystery that would be debated for centuries, but the palpable sense of dread was gone, replaced by a strange, fragile sense of hope. Aegis, under the quiet guidance of a changed Valerius, had been repurposed. Its technology, once used for containment, was now a global network for research and protection, working with Pokémon to understand and shield the world from future threats. On a sun-drenched, secluded beach in Alola, Ash Ketchum sat in the sand, watching the turquoise waves lap at the shore. His battered red cap lay beside him. The voice of the world was no longer a shout or a whisper. It was just a part of him now, as natural and constant as his own heartbeat. He could feel the lazy contentment of the Wingull overhead, the simple joy of the Lovedisk swimming in the surf. It was a peaceful, beautiful chorus. Cynthia sat beside him, her long blonde hair tied back, her black coat exchanged for a simple sundress. She had a data slate on her lap, but she wasn't looking at it. They sat in a comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. So, she said finally, breaking the quiet. The bridge. The true master. Those are some pretty heavy titles. Ash shrugged, a smile playing on his lips. They're just words. I'm still just a trainer from Pallet Town. Somehow. I doubt that, she said softly. She leaned her head against his shoulder, a simple, comfortable gesture that felt more significant than any of their world-saving battles. What's next for the boy who saved reality? Ash looked at Pikachu, who was chasing a small Krabby at the water's edge, its movements full of pure, unadulterated joy. He didn't say anything aloud. He just projected a thought, a feeling, a question he had asked 1,000 times before. Ready for the next one, buddy? He didn't hear a word in reply. He didn't need to. He felt a jolt of pure, ecstatic happiness, a feeling as bright and powerful as any thunderbolt, a perfect, silent answer that had been the foundation of his entire life. Always. Chapter 10 End.